As the northern lights dance across the dark Scandinavian sky, casting their ethereal glow over ancient fjords and mist-shrouded forests, we begin our peaceful journey back through time to explore the fascinating world of the Vikings. Before we sail into these historic waters together, I invite you to join our growing community of history enthusiasts by subscribing to this channel. And if you find yourself drifting peacefully into these Norse tales, please consider leaving a gentle like. I'd also love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Feel free to share in the comments below, along with any historical topics you'd like us to explore in future episodes. Let us now turn our thoughts to the distant shores of medieval Scandinavia, where the story of the Vikings begins to unfold across the misty expanse of time. The period we know as the Viking Age stretched from approximately 793 CE to 1066 CE, though the roots of Norse culture reach far deeper into the rich soil of history. These were not simply the fierce raiders of popular imagination, but rather a complex society of farmers, craftsmen, traders, and explorers who shaped the medieval world in profound and lasting ways. Picture yourself standing on the rocky coastline of 9th century Norway, where the salt spray carries the scent of adventure on the wind, and the rhythmic sound of waves matches the steady beat of hammers from nearby shipyards. Here, skilled craftsmen carefully shape the sturdy oak planks that will become the legendary longships, their tools creating a gentle percussion that echoes across the centuries. These vessels, with their distinctive dragon-headed prows and billowing striped sails, would become the very symbol of Viking achievement, carrying their influence across vast oceans and distant shores. As we drift through the mists of time, we see how these remarkable ships enabled the Norse people to establish trading networks that stretch from the midnight sun of the Arctic Circle to the warm waters of the Mediterranean, from the green hills of Ireland to the distant markets of Constantinople. The Vikings were as much merchants as they were warriors, trading precious amber, walrus ivory, and fine furs for silver, silk, and spices from distant lands. Their settlements grew and flourished across a vast expanse of territory, from their homeland in Scandinavia to new colonies in Iceland, Greenland, and even a brief but significant presence in North America, at Elant's Ox Meadows in modern-day Newfoundland. These intrepid settlers carried with them not just their possessions, but their rich cultural traditions, their complex mythology, and their sophisticated social systems. In the quiet hours of northern nights, Norse skalds would weave tales of gods and heroes, of Odin's wisdom and Thor's mighty hammer, of the great world tree Yggdrasil, and the 9 realms it connected. These stories, passed down through generations, would eventually be recorded in the medieval Icelandic sagas, preserving their cultural heritage like amber preserving ancient insects, holding their memories intact across the centuries. As we prepare to delve deeper into this rich tapestry of history, we'll explore how the Viking Age transformed not just Scandinavia, but much of medieval Europe and beyond. We'll follow the paths of legendary figures like Harald Hardrada, Eric the Red, and Leif Erikson, whose journeys would reshape the known world. We'll witness the gradual transition from traditional Norse beliefs to Christianity, and see how Viking culture slowly merged with and influenced the medieval societies they encountered. Let us now begin our detailed exploration of this remarkable era, where each wave that breaks against a distant shore carries with it tales of adventure, discovery, and transformation. As we journey together through this rich historical landscape, allow the gentle rhythm of these ancient stories to carry you toward peaceful contemplation and restful sleep. Let us journey back to the quiet forests and fjords of Scandinavia, to time before the age of Vikings truly began. In the middle of the 8th century, around 750 CE, the northern lands were experiencing subtle but significant changes that would shape the coming centuries. The gentle lapping of waves against wooden boats and the soft crackling of hearth fires formed the backdrop to daily life in this pre-Viking world. In these decades, the people of what we now call Denmark, Norway, and Sweden lived in small, scattered settlements. Their wooden longhouses nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. The smoke from cooking fires would rise lazily into the crisp northern air, while children played among grazing cattle and sheep. Communities were organized into extended family groups called clans, each led by a chieftain who maintained order through a delicate balance of tradition and personal authority. The landscape itself helped shape these early societies. Along the Norwegian coast, deep fjords carved by ancient glaciers provided sheltered harbors for fishing boats. In Denmark's fertile plains, farmers tended fields of barley and rye, their wooden plows turning the rich soil as they had for generations. Sweden's vast forests provided timber for building and fuel for the long northern winters, while its waterways connected scattered settlements. During this period, trade was already becoming increasingly important. Amber from the Baltic shores, furs from the northern forests, and iron from Swedish mines moved along established routes, exchanged through a network of seasonal markets and trading posts. The quiet rippling of water marked the passage of trading vessels along the coasts and rivers, their crews navigating by the stars and sharing news from distant shores. The people of this time were skilled craftsmen, working with wood, iron, and precious metals. In their workshops, metalworkers carefully shaped delicate brooches and sturdy tools, while woodcarvers created beautiful decorative pieces adorned with intricate patterns. Women worked wool into warm clothing, their spinning wheels humming gentle rhythms through the long winter evenings. Religious beliefs centered around the Old Norse gods, with Thor, Odin, and Freya playing central roles in daily life. Sacred groves stood quiet and mysterious in the forests, while stone circles marked places of ceremony and gathering. The soft whisper of prayer and the melodic chanting of skalds telling ancient stories would float on the evening air during festivals and celebrations. Social structure was based on a three-tiered system of carls free farmers, jarls nobles, and thralls slaves. Most people were carls, living in family groups and working their own land. Local things, or assemblies, brought communities together to settle disputes and make important decisions, their discussions carried out under the open sky in traditional meeting places. Technological advances were gradually changing life in these northern lands. Improved farming tools allowed for better harvests, while developments in shipbuilding were laying the groundwork for future maritime achievements. The distinctive clinker-built ships, with overlapping wooden planks, were becoming more sophisticated, though they had not yet evolved into the famous Viking longships. As the year 793 approached, though none could know it then, these communities were on the cusp of dramatic change. The skills they had developed in navigation, shipbuilding, and metalworking would soon be turned to new purposes. The trading networks they had established would expand far beyond their current reach. But for now, life continued in its seasonal rhythms, marked by the turning of the years and the cycle of planting and harvest. These pre-Viking societies, with their complex social structures and developed crafts, formed the foundation from which the Viking Age would emerge. Their knowledge of the sea, their trading connections, and their cultural practices would all influence the dramatic developments that were soon to come. Yet in these quiet years before the storm, the people of Scandinavia lived their lives in the ancient ways, their stories echoing across the centuries to reach us today. Let us gently explore the intricate social fabric and belief systems that shaped life in Viking Age Scandinavia. As the cool winds swept across the fjords and forests, Norse society maintained a carefully structured order that would endure for centuries. At the foundation of Norse society were the three main social classes: the jarls or nobles, the carls or free people, and the thralls or slaves. Like the branches of Yggdrasil, the great world tree of Norse mythology, these social roots spread deep and wide through their communities. The jarls lived in grand longhouses, their halls filled with the warmth of hearth fires and the soft glow of imported glass beads. Below them, the carls made up the majority of the population: farmers, craftspeople, and merchants who owned their own land and could speak at the thing. the local assembly where decisions were made. The Norse worldview was deeply intertwined with their beliefs in the gods and spirits that inhabited their world. They imagined 9 distinct worlds connected by Yggdrasil, with Midgard, the realm of humans, at its center. Above in Asgard dwelt the Aesir gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya, while below lay Helheim, the realm of the dead. The gentle rustle of leaves in sacred groves and the soft murmur of streams were thought to carry messages from these other worlds. In their daily lives, the Norse people practiced their faith through both private rituals and public ceremonies. In the quiet of their homes, families would leave small offerings of food and drink for the Landvitir, the land spirits who watched over their farms. During the changing of seasons, communities would gather for larger blots, ceremonial feasts where they would share meat and mead, their voices rising in songs that echoed across the valleys. The Thing system was central to Norse governance and justice. These assemblies were held in open air, often at ancient meeting places marked by standing stones. Here, under the vast Nordic sky, free people would gather to settle disputes, establish laws, and make important decisions for their community. The air would be filled with the measured voices of speakers presenting their cases, while others listened thoughtfully, wrapped in their wool cloaks against the cool breeze. Family bonds and honor were paramount in Norse society. The concept of frith, a state of peace and goodwill within the family and community, was carefully maintained through complex systems of gift-giving and hospitality. In the warm glow of longhouse hearths, visitors would be welcomed with cups of mead and tales of ancestors, strengthening the bonds between families and communities. The Norse understanding of fate, or weird, wove through all aspects of their lives like a golden thread. They believed that while the Norns, the 3 fate-weaving goddesses, had spun the basic pattern of one's life, individual actions could still influence its ultimate shape. This belief gave rise to a culture that valued both personal responsibility and acceptance of life's uncertainties. Women in Norse society held significant rights compared to many contemporary cultures. They could own property, inherit wealth, and in some cases, run farms and businesses. The soft clicking of their looms and the gentle swish of keys at their belts, symbols of their authority as household managers, were common sounds in Norse settlements. The Norse calendar marked time through 2 seasons, summer and winter, with celebrations marking the transitions between them. The wheel of the year turned with festivals like Yule in midwinter, when families would gather in fire-lit halls, sharing stories and meals while the snow fell softly outside, and midsummer, when the endless northern days were filled with feasting and games. This complex social and belief system provided the framework that would enable Norse society to adapt and thrive through centuries of change, leaving an indelible mark on the cultures they would encounter in their journeys across the seas. Let us drift back to the early settlements of Viking Age Scandinavia, where the first Norse communities took root in the fertile valleys and along the protected fjords of the north. As the cool mists roll across the ancient landscapes, we can envision the gradual establishment of these earliest Nordic settlements, beginning around the 6th and 7th centuries CE. Picture the peaceful scene of a small settlement nestled between towering mountains and calm waters. The first permanent Norse communities typically centered around a longhouse, its sturdy timber frame rising from the earth, smoke curling gently from the central hearth through holes in the peaked roof. Around these longhouses, families would clear land for small fields where they cultivated barley, rye, and other hardy grains that could withstand the northern climate. The archaeological record tells us of these early settlements through the quiet whispers of artifacts left behind. At sites like Borg in Lafon, Norway, we find the remains of impressive longhouses, some reaching lengths of up to 83 meters. These buildings sheltered extended families and their livestock during the long winter months, when the warm glow of the hearth fire would illuminate the gathering of people sharing stories and working on crafts. The settlement pattern followed the gentle rhythm of the landscape. In Denmark, villages often formed around a central commons, with individual farmsteads spreading outward across the rolling hills. In Norway, the steep valleys and fjords led to more scattered settlements, with farms nestled wherever suitable land could be found. Sweden's settlements often followed the waterways, particularly around Lake Mälaren, where rich soil and natural harbors provided ideal conditions for growing communities. Listen to the soft sounds of daily life in these early settlements. The bleating of sheep, the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer, the gentle splashing of waves against wooden boats pulled up on the shore. Women would be spinning wool into thread, their spindle whorls turning with a subtle whir, while children helped tend to the gardens where vegetables and herbs grew in neat rows. The organization of these settlements reflected the Norse understanding of land ownership and social bonds. The concept of odal rights, hereditary land ownership, became deeply ingrained in Norse society. Families would pass their farms down through generations, creating strong connections to specific places and landscapes. The Thing system, a form of local governance, emerged from these settlement patterns, with regular meetings held at designated places where community decisions would be made. As we rest our thoughts on this period, we can observe how the settlements gradually grew more complex. Storage buildings began to appear alongside longhouses, their contents protecting communities through harsh winters. Boat houses were built along the shores, sheltering the vessels that would later carry Norse explorers across distant seas. Small workshops emerged where craftspeople worked with metal, wood, and leather, creating the tools and items needed for daily life. The archaeological site of Hedeby, in modern-day northern Germany, provides a peaceful window into how these early settlements evolved. Beginning as a small trading post in the 8th century, it gradually grew into a significant settlement with organized streets, specialized craft areas, and a protective wall. The quiet layers of soil reveal how generation after generation built upon what came before, each adding their own contribution to the community's growth. In these early settlements, we find the foundations of what would become the Viking Age. The skills developed in building ships, working metal, and organizing communities would later enable the Norse people to venture far beyond their homeland. But for now, in these peaceful early days, we see them primarily as farmers, craftspeople, and settlers, working with the land and sea to create sustainable communities in the challenging northern environment. As the sun sets over these ancient settlements, casting long shadows across the fields and fjords, we can appreciate how these early communities laid the groundwork for all that would follow in Norse history. Their careful building of homes, cultivation of fields, and establishment of social structures would provide the stable foundation from which later Viking Age achievements would grow. Let us now drift into the remarkable technological achievements of the Viking Age, where skilled craftsmen shaped wood and iron into vessels that would forever change the course of history. As the cool northern winds whisper through time, we'll explore how the Norse people developed their legendary shipbuilding expertise. In the quiet workshops along the fjords, Viking shipwrights perfected their craft through generations of accumulated knowledge. The distinctive clinker-built technique they mastered involved overlapping wooden planks, each carefully shaped and fitted to create a flexible hull that could bend with the waves rather than fight against them. Picture the steady rhythm of mallets striking wooden pegs, securing each plank to the sturdy oak frames beneath. The most revolutionary innovation was the development of the keel, a massive timber running the length of the ship that provided unprecedented stability. This advancement, emerging around the 7th century, allowed for larger vessels that could safely navigate the open seas. The gentle curve of the keel, rising at both ends, created the graceful lines that would become instantly recognizable as Viking ships. Among the most remarkable vessels were the longships, or langskip, which began appearing in the late 8th century. These sleek craft, some reaching lengths of up to 30 meters, combined shallow drafts with impressive stability. Imagine standing beside one of these magnificent ships, feeling the smooth-planed oak beneath your fingers, admiring how the overlapping planks created a surface as seamless as fish scales. The ingenuity of Viking shipwrights extended to the sail technology they developed. The large square sail, typically woven from wool, could be adjusted to harness winds from various directions. In the quieter moments between voyages, women would work at their looms, carefully weaving the thick wool that would eventually catch the wind and drive these vessels across vast distances. The ships were not only technical masterpieces, but also works of art. Elaborate carvings adorned the prow and stern, while the dragonhead posts could be removed when approaching peaceful settlements. The gentle curves of these decorative elements weren't merely aesthetic. They served to ward off evil spirits and demonstrate the wealth and power of the ship's owner. Beyond shipbuilding, Viking craftsmen excelled in other technological areas. Their ironworking skills produced tools and weapons of remarkable quality. In the dim light of their forges, smiths would work their bellows, the steady whoosh of air feeding the flames as they transformed raw iron into everything from delicate needles to mighty sword blades. The Vikings also developed sophisticated navigation techniques. Using simple tools like the sun compass, they could determine their latitude by measuring the sun's height at noon. They learned to read the patterns of waves, winds, and wildlife to guide their vessels across the open ocean. Cloud formations, the flight of birds, and even the behavior of whales all provided crucial navigational information. Their technological prowess extended to everyday items as well. The Vikings created efficient farming tools, intricate locks and keys, and precise weighing scales for trade. They developed specialized tools for woodworking, textile production, and shipbuilding, each carefully designed for its specific purpose. As we settle into this contemplation of Viking innovation, we can appreciate how these technological developments transformed Norse society. The ability to build seaworthy vessels opened new horizons for trade, exploration, and settlement. The quiet harbors of Scandinavia became gateways to distant lands, while local communities thrived through the exchange of goods and ideas that these technological advances made possible. The legacy of Viking technology lives on in maritime traditions that persisted for centuries. The principles of their shipbuilding continued to influence naval architecture long after the Viking Age had passed. Even today, as waves lap against modern shores, we can still appreciate the ingenuity of those ancient Norse craftsmen who shaped wood and iron into tools that changed the world. As the late 8th century dawned across the North Sea, a profound change was stirring in Scandinavian society. The gentle lapping of waves against curved wooden hulls would soon give way to the rhythmic beating of oars, as Norse ships ventured further from their familiar fjords and coastal waters. Let us drift back to this pivotal moment, when the Viking Age truly began to unfold. On a misty summer morning in 793 CE, the peaceful monastery of Lindisfarne, off the coast of Northumbria, awakened to an unprecedented sight. Through the rolling fog came sleek ships with dragon-headed prows, their oars cutting smoothly through the gray waters. This raid on Lindisfarne, recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, marked what many historians consider the beginning of the Viking Age. The monks' quill pens would write of how the raiders moved like shadows through the morning mist, their footsteps echoing across the stone floors of the monastery. In the years that followed, similar scenes would play out along the coasts of Britain, Ireland, and Francia. The soft whisper of sailcloth in the wind and the gentle creaking of oak-built ships became sounds that struck fear into coastal communities. Yet these early raids were not random acts of violence, but carefully planned expeditions that reflected changing circumstances in Scandinavia itself. The quiet fields and forests of the Norse homeland held their own stories of population growth, land pressure, and social change. Through the quiet winters, Norse communities would prepare their ships and weapons, while sharing tales of distant shores and valuable treasures. The scent of pine tar used to seal their vessels mixed with the smoke from longhouse hearths as raiders planned their summer voyages. These early expeditions were typically small in scale, involving perhaps 2 or 3 ships, each carrying around 30 men. They would select their targets carefully, focusing on wealthy but poorly defended coastal sites. Between 795 and 800 CE, Irish monasteries began to record visits from these foreigners from across the sea. The monastery of Iona was raided in 795, followed by attacks on Rathlin Island and Inishmore. The sound of warning bells would echo across peaceful monastic communities, their bronze tones carrying news of approaching danger across the quiet countryside. Yet these raids were not solely about violence. They were complex interactions that sometimes involved trade and negotiation. As the years passed like gentle waves upon a shore, the pattern of Viking activity gradually evolved. By the 820s, raids were becoming larger and more organized. The soft padding of Norse feet on foreign soil became more frequent, as raiders began to establish temporary bases called longforts, particularly in Ireland. These bases allowed them to extend their range and duration of activities, while learning more about the lands they visited. The written records tell us of notable early raiders like Reginharus, who led attacks along the Seine River in Francia during the 840s. The chronicles speak of how his ships would appear silently in the morning mist, their crews moving with practiced efficiency. The rhythmic sound of rowing would often be the first warning of their approach, carrying across still waters at dawn. By 850 CE, the nature of Viking activity was slowly shifting. What had begun as quick raids was developing into something more permanent. Some raiders began to stay through winters, establishing camps that would eventually grow into settlements. The air filled with the sounds of construction, the steady thud of axes splitting wood, the scrape of saws, and the murmur of Norse voices speaking their ancient tongue in new lands. Throughout these early decades, the raiders brought back not just treasure, but knowledge. Stories of distant lands and peoples circulated through the long winter nights in Scandinavian halls, inspiring others to venture forth. Silver coins from distant lands clinked softly in traders' pouches, while new ideas and technologies filtered back to the Norse homeland. The dawn of the Viking Age was not just about raids and violence, but about the beginning of a vast network of connections that would reshape northern Europe. As the mists cleared on that fateful morning of June 8, 793 CE, the peaceful monastery of Lindisfarne stood quietly on its tidal island off the Northumbrian coast. The monks went about their morning prayers, unaware that this day would mark a profound turning point in European history. Across the gray waters of the North Sea, sleek longships with dragon-headed prows sliced through the waves, carrying Norse warriors who would forever change the course of events. The raid on Lindisfarne was not the first Viking attack, but it sent unprecedented shock waves through Christian Europe. The monastery, known for its precious illuminated manuscripts and religious treasures, represented the heart of Northumbrian Christianity. As the raiders approached, the morning silence gave way to the sound of oars cutting through water, followed by the soft crunch of ships' keels on the beach. The monks, who had never faced such a threat, could only watch as warriors in mail shirts and carrying shields moved swiftly across the sand. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells us how the raiders took the monastery's treasures, destroyed sacred religious objects, and killed or captured many of the monks. The gentle rhythm of monastic life, which had continued undisturbed for generations, was shattered. The famous scholar Alcuin of York later wrote of how the Church of St. Cuthbert is spattered with the blood of the priests of God. His words carried a deep melancholy that echoed across Christian Europe. In the years that followed, the success of the Lindisfarne raid encouraged further expansion. Norse ships began appearing with increasing frequency along the coasts of Britain, Ireland, and Francia. The raiders developed a pattern of attacking during the warmer months when seas were calmer, following the natural rhythm of the seasons. They would establish temporary bases on islands or in protected harbors, from which they could launch raids into the surrounding countryside. The early expansion phase saw Vikings exploring and raiding along various routes. Some followed the Western Sea route, moving through the northern Isles of Scotland, down the Irish Sea, and eventually reaching Ireland. Others took the eastern route along the North Sea coast, probing the rivers and estuaries of Francia. The sound of approaching Viking ships became a dreaded herald of danger in coastal communities. These early raids were characterized by their hit-and-run nature. The Vikings would strike quickly, gather what valuable goods they could carry, and return to their ships before local forces could organize a response. They showed a remarkable ability to navigate shallow rivers, using their shallow-drafted longships to penetrate deep inland. The gentle lapping of water against wood accompanied their journeys as they explored ever further into unknown territories. By the 830s, the pattern of raiding had evolved. Instead of returning home each winter, some Viking groups began to establish winter camps, known as longforts in Ireland. These bases allowed them to maintain a continuous presence in foreign lands. The smell of wood smoke from their settlements began to mingle with the salt air of coastal regions, as temporary camps gradually became more permanent. The impact of these early expansions reached far beyond simple raiding. Trading relationships began to develop alongside warfare. Vikings would often return to the same regions repeatedly, learning about local resources and establishing complex relationships with local populations. The sound of hammers and saws would sometimes replace the clash of weapons, as Norse craftsmen set up workshops in their winter camps. The early expansion phase also saw the beginning of significant cultural exchange. Despite the violence of their initial contacts, Vikings began to absorb elements of the cultures they encountered. Christian religious items appeared among their possessions, not just as loot, but as objects of curiosity and eventual adoption. The gentle rustle of manuscript pages joined the traditional sounds of Norse life, as literacy slowly began to spread among the Vikings. As we drift towards sleep, imagine the gradual transformation taking place during these years. The initial shock of the Lindisfarne raid rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water, leading to changes that would reshape the medieval world. The Norse expansion had begun, and with it, a new chapter in European history was being written, one raid, one settlement, one cultural exchange at a time. As the Viking Age unfolded across northern Europe, several interweaving factors gently pushed the Norse people beyond their ancestral lands, like tributaries joining to form a mighty river. Let us explore these causes with careful consideration, allowing our minds to drift through the mists of time to understand what prompted these remarkable journeys. In the cool fjords and fertile valleys of Scandinavia, population pressure gradually built during the 8th century. The traditional practice of inheritance meant that only the eldest son would receive the family farm, leaving younger sons to seek their fortunes elsewhere. Picture the quiet conversations around evening hearth fires, as younger brothers contemplated their futures while shadows danced on wooden walls. The climate during this period played its own subtle role. The medieval warm period, beginning around 800 CE, brought longer growing seasons and better farming conditions to Scandinavia. This prosperity led to population growth, yet the rugged landscape offered limited arable land. Like morning frost giving way to spring sunshine, these conditions slowly encouraged expansion beyond familiar shores. Trading networks had long connected Scandinavia with distant lands. The gentle lapping of waves against ships' hulls carried Norse merchants along established routes to trade valuable goods like furs, amber, and walrus ivory. These peaceful exchanges provided knowledge of foreign lands and their wealth, planting seeds of possibility in Norse minds. They learned of prosperous monasteries, flourishing towns, and fertile lands that lay within reach of their advanced ships. Political changes rippled across Scandinavia like wind across a field of summer grass. The consolidation of power under stronger kings meant that some chieftains and their followers chose to seek opportunities elsewhere rather than submit to growing central authority. In Norway, particularly, the rise of Harald Fairhair in the late 9th century prompted some nobles to sail west to new lands. The Norse worldview and religious beliefs gently encouraged exploration and brave deeds. Their stories told of heroes who ventured far from home, earning fame and fortune. The concept of weird, or fate, suggested that one's destiny was both predetermined yet influenced by bold action. Around smoky longhouse fires, skalds recited tales that inspired dreams of adventure and glory. Technological advancement in shipbuilding opened new horizons like dawn breaking over eastern hills. The development of the iconic Viking longship, with its shallow draft and remarkable seaworthiness, made longer voyages possible. These vessels could navigate both open seas and rivers, allowing Norse sailors to reach distant shores and venture deep inland along waterways. Economic opportunities beckoned like distant lighthouse beacons. The silver mines of the Islamic world created demand for trade goods, while European monasteries and towns offered both trading opportunities and potential plunder. The Norse discovered that their military prowess and seafaring skills could bring wealth through various means: peaceful trade, paid military service, or raiding. Social structures in Viking society valued personal honor and success. Young men sought to prove themselves and gain wealth to establish their own households. The practice of gift-giving among chiefs and their followers required constant sources of valuable goods. Like a gentle current pulling ships seaward, these cultural practices encouraged both trade and raiding. The weakening of power structures in Western Europe created opportunities that drew Norse attention. The fragmentation of Charlemagne's empire, internal conflicts in Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and the general decentralization of power meant that wealthy targets often lacked strong defenses. Like autumn leaves scattered by wind, political fragmentation left openings for Norse intervention. These various causes flowed together like streams joining a river, creating the powerful current of Viking expansion. Some sought land to farm, others desired trade and wealth, while some followed political leaders or pursued adventure. The resulting movement would reshape northern Europe, establishing Norse settlements from Ireland to Russia and leaving lasting marks on languages, cultures, and genetic heritage that we can still trace today. As word of Viking raids and incursions spread across Europe in the late 8th and early 9th centuries, the initial reactions from established kingdoms varied considerably, shaped by their different circumstances and capabilities. Let us explore how these realms first responded to the emerging Norse threat, as the gentle waves of change washed over European shores. In the British Isles, the response was at first surprisingly muted. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, accustomed to occasional coastal raids from various seafaring peoples, initially viewed the Vikings as simply another group of pirates. Local authorities would gather their fyrd or militia to defend threatened areas, but there was no coordinated response. The soft sounds of monastery bells continued to ring across the countryside, though now they sometimes served as warning signals when Viking ships were spotted on the horizon. The Frankish Empire under Charlemagne took a more systematic approach. Along the northern coasts, where the morning mist often concealed approaching longships, he established a network of defensive positions. In the cool shade of stone watchtowers, Frankish guards kept vigilant watch over the sea approaches. The emperor ordered the construction of new fortified bridges across rivers and stationed fleets at key ports, their oars waiting silently in the water. Irish kingdoms, scattered across their Emerald Isle, initially responded to Viking raids by strengthening their ring forts and repositioning settlements away from the coast. The quiet rustling of communities moving inland became a common sound, as people sought safety in the gentle hills and valleys of the interior. Monasteries began building round towers, their tall stone forms rising like silent guardians above the peaceful countryside. In the misty fjords of Scotland, local chiefs and kings adapted their existing defensive strategies. The soft padding of feet along ancient hilltop paths became more frequent as coastal communities established warning systems. The Picts and Scots, already experienced in defending their lands, incorporated Viking threats into their existing patterns of warfare and alliance. The response from religious institutions was particularly noteworthy. Monasteries, with their precious manuscripts and sacred treasures, began developing new practices for protecting their valuables. In the hushed scriptoriums, monks carefully copied important texts and distributed them to multiple locations. The gentle scratch of quills on parchment took on new urgency as they worked to preserve their cultural heritage. Trading centers and ports faced a complex challenge. While they needed to defend against raids, many also recognized the potential benefits of Norse trade. In the busy harbors, where the soft creaking of ship timbers mixed with the calls of seabirds, communities began developing more sophisticated approaches to dealing with Viking visitors. Some ports established specific areas where Norse traders could dock and conduct business, while maintaining careful watch over their activities. As the initial shock of Viking appearances began to fade, European kingdoms started to develop more nuanced strategies. Some rulers, like the Anglo-Saxon King Ethelred of Northumbria, attempted to negotiate with Viking leaders. In the quiet halls where such meetings took place, the soft murmur of translators could be heard as two different worlds attempted to find common ground. The gradual shift from pure defensive reactions to more complex responses marked an important transition in European Viking relations. In the peaceful countryside, where farmers continued their ancient patterns of planting and harvest, new watchtowers rose against the sky. Along the coasts, where fishing boats still pulled in their daily catch, harbors were fortified with new defenses. This period of initial reaction would eventually give way to more sophisticated responses as European kingdoms came to better understand the nature of Viking activities. The quiet transformation of coastal defenses and inland settlements laid the groundwork for the complex relationships that would develop in the centuries to come, as the sound of Norse voices became an increasingly familiar part of the European landscape. As the Viking raids and settlements expanded across Europe in the mid-9th century, a significant transformation was taking place in the scale and organization of Norse military campaigns. In the year 865, a formidable force known as the Great Heathen Army arrived on the shores of East Anglia in Britain. This was no ordinary raiding party, but rather a carefully coordinated military campaign led by the sons of the legendary Viking leader Ragnar Lothbrok. The cool autumn winds carried their dragon-headed ships across the North Sea, their wooden hulls creaking gently as they approached the English coastline. Among the leaders were Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan, and Ubb, each commanding their own contingent of warriors. The size of this army, while debated by historians, was substantial enough to pose a serious threat to the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, with estimates suggesting several thousand warriors. Unlike the swift raids of previous decades, the Great Heathen Army settled in for the winter, establishing camps where they could rest and plan their next moves. The smell of wood smoke drifted through their settlements as they prepared for the long campaign ahead. Their presence marked a shift from seasonal raiding to a strategy of conquest and permanent settlement. Moving with deliberate patience, the army began a methodical campaign across England. In 866, they captured the important city of York, establishing it as their base of operations in Northumbria. The stone walls of this former Roman city provided shelter as they consolidated their position, while local craftsmen and traders gradually began to interact with the Norse newcomers, leading to a slow blending of cultures. The army's success continued as they moved southward. The kingdoms of Northumbria, East Anglia, and Mercia fell one by one to their advance. The Anglo-Saxon chronicles tell of how King Edmund of East Anglia met his end in 869, becoming venerated as a martyr. The great army's tactics were sophisticated, combining military might with political strategy, often installing puppet rulers in conquered territories. By 871, only the Kingdom of Wessex, under the leadership of the young King Alfred, stood against the Norse advance. The quiet fields and forests of southern England became the setting for a series of battles and skirmishes. Through careful diplomacy and military innovation, Alfred managed to resist total conquest, eventually signing a treaty with the Vikings in 878 that established the Danelaw, a vast territory in northern and eastern England under Norse control. The establishment of the Danelaw brought significant changes to English society. Norse settlers began arriving in greater numbers, bringing their families, customs, and way of life. The landscape gradually transformed as they established farms and trading centers. Their language influenced local dialects, leaving lasting marks on place names and everyday speech that we can still hear echoes of today. Meanwhile, similar processes were unfolding across the sea in Ireland and Scotland. Dublin, originally established as a Viking settlement, grew into a prosperous trading center. The Norse influence spread through the Scottish islands and highlands, where the rugged landscape reminded them of their Scandinavian homeland. The period of the Great Heathen Army marked a crucial transition in Viking activity, from primarily raiding to establishing permanent settlements and political control. The warriors who had once been content with plunder now became landowners, traders, and rulers. Their settlements grew into towns, their military camps evolved into administrative centers, and their influence became deeply woven into the fabric of British society. As the 9th century drew to a close, the descendants of these warriors were increasingly integrated into local communities. The sounds of Norse and Anglo-Saxon speech mingled in marketplaces, while Christian churches and pagan customs existed side by side. The Great Heathen Army had transformed not only the political landscape, but also the cultural and social makeup of the British Isles, creating a legacy that would influence European history for centuries to come. As the new century dawned, the Viking presence in England entered a new and more organized phase. The scattered raids of previous decades gave way to calculated campaigns of conquest and settlement. Let us drift back to those transformative years, when the very fabric of English society was being rewoven with Norse threads. In the cool autumn of 991, a significant turning point arrived with the Battle of Maldon in Essex. There, on the marshy banks where the Blackwater River meets the sea, Viking ships appeared like dark shadows on the horizon. The English nobleman Byrhtnoth faced the Norse warriors with determination, but his defeat would usher in a new era of systematic Viking pressure on English shores. King Ethelred II, who would come to be known as the Unready, responded to these intensifying threats by introducing a new policy: the payment of Danegeld, vast sums of silver given to Viking forces in exchange for peace. Picture the quiet clink of countless silver coins being counted and weighed, as English officials gathered the precious metal that would flow into Norse coffers. The first major payment in 991 amounted to 10,000 pounds of silver, an enormous sum that would only grow larger in subsequent years. Through the misty mornings and long winter nights, Viking forces continued to probe England's defenses. Sweyn Forkbeard, the ambitious king of Denmark, saw opportunity in England's weakness. Year by year, his forces grew more bold, their longships becoming an ever more common sight along English coasts. The wooden dragons carved on their prows threw long shadows across peaceful harbors, while the rhythmic splash of oars marked their steady approach. In the year 1013, Sweyn launched a full-scale invasion of England. His fleet, appearing like a floating forest on the horizon, brought overwhelming force to bear. Town by town, shire by shire, English resistance crumbled before the Danish advance. The smell of wood smoke from cooking fires began to mingle with the scent of burning thatch as villages faced the choice between submission or destruction. Listen to the soft footfalls of English nobles as they walked across stone floors to swear fealty to their new Danish overlord. Feel the weight of change in the air as ancient English institutions adapted to accommodate Norse rule. By the end of 1013, Sweyn had achieved what no Viking leader before him had managed: the conquest of all England. Yet fate had other plans. Sweyn's triumph was brief, as he died suddenly in February 1014. His son Cnut, young but already showing signs of the greatness that would later earn him the epithet the Great, was forced to withdraw temporarily to Denmark. During this brief respite, Ethelred returned from exile in Normandy, but his restoration would prove short-lived. In 1015, Cnut returned with a new fleet and fresh determination. For months, the sound of marching feet and clashing weapons echoed across the English countryside as Danish forces methodically consolidated their control. By 1016, following the death of both Ethelred and his son Edmund Ironside, Cnut stood as undisputed king of England. Under Cnut's firm but generally fair rule, England entered a period of relative peace and prosperity. The distinctions between English and Danish communities began to blur, like morning mist dissolving in sunlight. In market towns and farming villages, Norse settlers and English natives gradually learned to live together, their children playing in the same streets, their languages and customs slowly merging. The sound of Norse words began to weave themselves into English speech, like new threads in an ancient tapestry. Place names ending in by and thorp spread across the landscape, marking the presence of Danish settlers who had made England their home. In the quiet of evening gatherings, stories were shared in both languages, and slowly, very slowly, two peoples began to become one. This period of Danish rule would last until 1042, leaving an indelible mark on English society, language, and culture. The invasion of England represented not just a military conquest, but the beginning of a profound cultural transformation that would shape the future of both nations. As the Viking presence in England grew stronger in the late 9th century, a remarkable transformation began to take shape across the eastern and northern regions of the island. The term Danelaw emerged to describe the territories where Danish law and customs held sway, a vast area encompassing much of what we now know as Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, East Anglia, and the East Midlands. Here, amidst the gentle rolling hills and fertile valleys, Norse settlers began to establish themselves alongside the Anglo-Saxon population. In the year 878, following the decisive Battle of Edington, King Alfred the Great and the Viking leader Guthrum reached a watershed agreement. Under the Treaty of Wedmore, the Vikings would withdraw from Wessex but retain control over their conquered territories in the north and east. Guthrum, accepting baptism and taking the Christian name Ethelstan, became the first Danish king to rule over this newly defined region with Alfred's blessing. The soft whisper of change echoed across the landscape as two distinct cultures began their gradual interweaving. Throughout the Danelaw, Viking settlers brought with them their traditional ways of life, their language, and their social structures. The rhythm of daily life took on new patterns as Norse farmers introduced their agricultural methods, working the rich English soil with familiar tools and techniques from their homeland. In the growing settlements, the air filled with the mingled sounds of Old English and Old Norse, as traders and craftspeople from both communities went about their business in the bustling marketplaces. The influence of Danish rule manifested in various ways across the landscape. New place names appeared, ending in by, thorp, and toft, marking settlements large and small. These Norse names still echo through time: Whitby, Grimsby, Scunthorpe, each telling a story of Viking settlement and influence. The legal system in these areas incorporated Scandinavian concepts, with the establishment of thingsites where local assemblies would gather to settle disputes and make decisions affecting the community. Archaeological evidence reveals the gradual blending of cultures in the Danelaw. Craftspeople created objects that combined Anglo-Saxon and Norse artistic styles, while burial practices showed a mixture of traditional Viking and Christian customs. In the workshops and homes of the Danelaw, the gentle tap of hammers and the soft whir of spinning wheels continued as before, but now produced items that reflected this unique cultural fusion. The establishment of the Danelaw brought significant changes to urban life as well. The Vikings reinvigorated many existing towns and established new trading centers. York, known to the Norse as Jorvik, became a thriving metropolitan center where merchants from across the known world would gather. The streets filled with the subtle aromas of exotic spices, the soft clink of silver coins, and the quiet conversations of traders speaking various languages. As the years passed, the distinction between Viking and Anglo-Saxon communities gradually softened. Intermarriage became common, and children grew up speaking both languages and observing both sets of customs. The landscape itself began to reflect this integration, with churches and thing sites standing side by side, and farms working the land according to both Norse and English agricultural traditions. The Danelaw's influence extended beyond its borders, affecting the development of the English language itself. Many common words in modern English sky, egg, law, window, came from Old Norse, quietly slipping into everyday speech during this period of coexistence. The administrative systems also showed Norse influence, with the division of counties into ridings and the establishment of wapentakes as administrative units. This period of settlement and integration would continue to shape English society for generations to come, creating a unique blend of cultures that would influence everything from legal traditions to artistic expression. The establishment of the Danelaw represented not just a political arrangement, but a profound cultural transformation that would leave an indelible mark on the history of both England and Scandinavia. As the Viking presence grew stronger in England through the Danelaw, other Norse warriors and settlers turned their attention to the rich territories of Francia and the Low Countries. The gentle waters of the Rhine, Scheldt, and Seine rivers beckoned to Viking longships, offering passages deep into the heartland of Western Europe. In the late 8th century, the first Norse raiders began probing the Frankish coast, testing the defenses established by Charlemagne. The sound of oars cutting through river waters and the sight of dragon-headed prows emerging from the morning mist became dreaded omens for the Frankish populations. By 820, regular raiding expeditions were venturing up the Seine and Loire rivers, their crews drawn by tales of wealthy monasteries and prosperous trading towns. The year 834 marked a significant escalation, as Viking forces attacked the important trading center of Dorstad in Frisia. The busy port, filled with the subtle aromas of exotic spices and the soft rustling of traded silks, was raided repeatedly over the following years. The wooden buildings and warehouses of Dorstad, weathered by salt air and commerce, became regular targets as Vikings established seasonal bases in the region. The Seine Valley proved particularly attractive to Norse expeditions. In 845, a fleet led by the chieftain Ragnar Lodbrok sailed up the Seine to Paris. The city's inhabitants watched with growing concern as dozens of longships appeared on the river's smooth surface. The Frankish defenders could do little as the Vikings established a camp on an island in the Seine, their cookfires sending wisps of smoke into the evening air. Throughout the 850s and 860s, Viking activities in Francia intensified. Groups of raiders established winter camps, or bases, along the major rivers. These settlements, surrounded by earthen ramparts and wooden palisades, served as launching points for further expeditions. The sound of axes splitting wood and hammers shaping defenses echoed across these riverside encampments, while scouts watched the surrounding countryside for any sign of Frankish response. The Vikings demonstrated remarkable adaptability in their campaigns. When confronted with Frankish defenses, they would often portage their ships around obstacles or divide their forces to attack from multiple directions. The soft splash of oars and creak of wooden hulls became familiar sounds along the inland waterways of Francia, as Norse ships ventured ever deeper into the territory. In 862, a significant Viking force established a base on the island of Noirmoutier at the Loire's mouth. From there, they conducted raids up and down the coastline, their sails catching the Atlantic breezes as they moved between river systems. The raiders developed an intimate knowledge of the region's geography, learning the rhythms of tides and the patterns of local weather. The impact on Frankish society was profound. Monasteries began relocating their treasures inland, while local communities constructed defensive works. The smell of freshly turned earth and new stone walls became common as towns fortified themselves against Norse incursions. Some Frankish nobles began hiring Viking mercenaries for protection, leading to a gradual integration of Norse warriors into local power structures. By the 880s, some Viking groups were settling permanently in the regions they had once raided. The Low Countries, with their familiar maritime environment and rich agricultural lands, proved particularly attractive. The sound of Norse speech began mixing with local Frankish dialects in the marketplaces, while traditional Scandinavian building techniques influenced local architecture. The campaigns in Francia and the Low Countries represented a complex interaction between Norse newcomers and established Frankish society. Through decades of conflict and eventual settlement, these regions experienced significant cultural and political changes. The Vikings' presence contributed to the development of new defensive systems, trading networks, and social structures that would shape medieval European society for centuries to come. As the evening mist settled over the river valleys of Francia, the story of Viking campaigns in these lands became interwoven with the broader tapestry of European history. The sound of waves lapping against shore and wind rustling through riverside reeds remained constant, even as the nature of Norse presence evolved from raiding to settlement and integration. While Viking raids and settlements in the west drew much attention, an equally important expansion was taking place toward the east, where Norse traders and explorers established vast networks stretching deep into modern-day Russia and beyond. Along the great rivers of Eastern Europe, Swedish Vikings known as Rus ventured forth, their sleek vessels gliding through the quiet waters of the Volga, Dnieper, and Dvina. Picture the bustling trading center of Birka, nestled on an island in Lake Mälaren in present-day Sweden. Here, merchants from distant lands would gather, their voices a gentle murmur as they exchanged amber, furs, and iron for exotic silks, spices, and silver coins from the Arab world. The air would have been rich with the scent of pine tar from ship repairs, mingled with the exotic aromas of foreign goods. The Rus established a string of trading posts and settlements along the river routes, each one a beacon of commerce in the vast wilderness. At Staria Ladoga, founded around 850 CE, archaeological evidence reveals a peaceful coexistence of Norse traders with local Finnic and Slavic peoples. The settlement's wooden buildings would have creaked softly in the wind, while craftsmen worked steadily at their forges and looms, creating goods for trade. Moving further south, the Rus founded Kiev, which would become the heart of a new realm. Under the leadership of figures like Oleg the Wise and Igor the Old, the Rus gradually transformed from traders into rulers, establishing what historians now call the Kievan Rus state. The process was as gradual as the changing of seasons, with Norse customs slowly blending with local Slavic traditions. The eastern trade routes, known as the Way of the Varangians to the Greeks, stretched from the Baltic Sea through the rivers of Russia to Constantinople, the magnificent capital of the Byzantine Empire. Norse traders would navigate these waterways with patience and skill, portaging their ships between rivers when necessary, their crews working in quiet harmony to maintain their precious cargo. Archaeological finds tell us of the remarkable reach of these trade networks. In the quiet earth of Scandinavian graves, we find delicate silver dirhams from Baghdad and Damascus, luminous silk fragments from Byzantium, and gleaming glass beads from the distant workshops of the Mediterranean. Each artifact tells a story of long journeys and peaceful exchanges between cultures. The trading post of Hedeby, located in modern-day northern Germany, served as a crucial link between the eastern and western trade networks. Here, goods from the far reaches of the known world would change hands in a carefully choreographed dance of commerce. The air would have been filled with the soft sounds of different languages, the gentle clinking of silver being weighed, and the rustle of fine fabrics being examined. In the markets of Constantinople, Norse merchants would present their valuable northern goods, furs, amber, honey, and slaves, in exchange for the luxurious products of the Byzantine Empire. The Rus guards who served the Byzantine emperors, known as the Varangian Guard, provided a stable presence that helped facilitate these trading relationships. By the year 1000 CE, these Eastern trade networks had helped transform Scandinavian society. The wealth flowing back to the north brought new ideas, technologies, and artistic influences. In the workshops of skilled craftsmen, these foreign influences merged with traditional Norse designs, creating new styles that would influence art and architecture for generations to come. The steady flow of silver from the east also helped establish more sophisticated economic systems in Scandinavia, gradually moving from a purely weight-based economy to one that increasingly used coins. In the quiet counting houses of merchants, silver pieces would be carefully weighed and measured, their soft clicking a reminder of the vast networks that brought them there. This eastern expansion represents a less violent but equally significant aspect of Viking Age achievement, showing how trade and cultural exchange could build lasting connections between distant peoples. The legacy of these trading networks would continue to influence Eastern Europe long after the Viking Age had passed into history. Let us journey now along the great rivers of Eastern Europe, following the paths of the Rus Vikings as they ventured toward the glittering city of Constantinople. These Scandinavian traders and warriors, known to the Slavic peoples as the Rus, established intricate networks along the waterways of modern-day Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, creating a fascinating chapter in the Viking saga that unfolded between the 9th and 11th centuries. Picture the scene as Norse seafarers guided their vessels up the Dnieper, Volga, and Dvina rivers, their oars cutting smoothly through the dark waters. The gentle sound of water lapping against wooden hulls echoed through forests of birch and pine, while the crews navigated their way past rapids and shallow stretches. These experienced mariners would often need to portage their ships, carrying them overland between river systems, their boots pressing into the soft earth as they maintained their vital connection between the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea. The Rus established important trading centers along these riverine highways. Among the most significant was Kiev, which grew from a modest settlement into a prosperous city under the leadership of rulers like Oleg, who arrived there around 882. In the quiet evenings, merchants from distant lands would gather in Kiev's marketplace, their voices a mixture of Norse, Slavic, Greek, and Arabic, as they traded amber, furs, honey, and slaves for silver coins, silks, and spices. Further north, Novgorod emerged as another crucial hub, where archaeological excavations have revealed countless artifacts that paint a picture of daily life: carved wooden combs, leather shoes, and delicate glass beads that once adorned the clothing of both Scandinavian and Slavic residents. The streets were paved with wooden planks that creaked beneath the feet of merchants and craftspeople going about their daily business. The route to Constantinople, which the Norse called Miklagard, the Great City, was both promising and perilous. The Rus had to navigate the treacherous rapids of the Dnieper River, known to them as the Seven Barriers. These passages required intimate knowledge of the river and careful timing with the seasons. In spring, when the waters ran high with melting snow, the journey was particularly dangerous but necessary for the trading season. Around 907, Oleg led a dramatic expedition to Constantinople, allegedly sailing his ships on wheels to the very walls of the city. While this tale may be more legend than fact, we do know that in 911, he negotiated an important trade agreement with the Byzantine Empire, establishing formal relations that would last for generations. The agreement allowed Rus merchants to trade freely in Constantinople's markets, though they were required to enter the city through specific gates and conduct their business under careful supervision. The Byzantine Emperor's palace complex, with its golden mosaics and marble halls, must have seemed like something from another world to the Rus visitors. Many Scandinavians found employment in the Byzantine Emperor's Varangian Guard, an elite unit of foreign warriors who served as personal bodyguards. These guards lived in comfortable quarters near the palace, their Norse weapons hanging on walls decorated with Eastern tapestries. As time passed, the Rus gradually merged with the local Slavic population, creating a distinctive culture that combined Norse and Slavic elements. This process can be traced in the changing styles of jewelry, architecture, and burial customs. The conversion of Vladimir the Great to Orthodox Christianity in 988 marked a significant shift, as the Rus began to align themselves more closely with Byzantine cultural and religious traditions. The river routes remained vital arteries of trade and communication well into the 11th century, their waters carrying not just goods but ideas, technologies, and artistic influences between Scandinavia and the Byzantine world. The legacy of these waterways can still be seen today in the architecture, art, and cultural heritage of modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, a lasting testament to the enterprising spirit of the Rus Vikings who first established these enduring connections. As Viking traders ventured eastward along the great rivers, they increasingly came into contact with the wealthy and sophisticated Islamic world. The quiet flow of silver dirhams, glinting in merchant pouches and trickling northward, tells the story of a remarkable trade network that connected the cold forests of Scandinavia with the sun-warmed bazaars of Baghdad and Samarkand. Beginning in the early 800s, Arab silver coins began appearing in growing numbers across Scandinavia. These distinctive circular dirhams, inscribed with flowing Arabic script, would become the foundation of Viking economic prosperity. Archaeological finds reveal how these coins were treasured, sometimes worn as jewelry or carefully stored in clay pots buried beneath the earthen floors of longhouses. The patient work of archaeologists has shown us how Islamic silver reached the north through a complex web of trade routes. From the great trading cities of Central Asia and Persia, caravans and ships carried precious metals and luxury goods northward to the Volga Bulgars, who acted as intermediaries between the Islamic world and the Rus Vikings. In the bustling market towns along the Volga River, traders would exchange their northern goods furs, amber, honey, wax, and sadly, slaves for the coveted silver coins and Eastern luxuries. The gentle whisper of silk being unfolded in a Norse merchant's booth, the subtle gleam of rock crystal beads, and the rich aroma of exotic spices all speak to the diversity of goods that flowed along these routes. Archaeological finds from Viking settlements include delicate glass vessels from Syria, carnelian beads from India, and fine textiles from Persia, silent testimonies to these far-reaching connections. Arabic writers of the period left us valuable accounts of their interactions with the Norse traders, whom they called the Rus. The scholar Ibn Fadlan, traveling as an ambassador in 922, provided a detailed description of these tall, fair-haired merchants he encountered along the Volga. His writings, though sometimes critical of Viking customs, paint a vivid picture of cultural exchange and mutual fascination between these very different peoples. In the quiet hours of market days, Vikings and Muslim merchants would have needed to find ways to communicate across their language barriers. Simple hand gestures, universal to all traders, would have accompanied the careful weighing of silver and the inspection of goods. The Vikings learned to appreciate the consistency and quality of Islamic silver, while Muslim traders came to value the northern furs and amber that were so exotic in their own lands. The steady flow of Islamic silver helped transform Scandinavian society. In settlements across the Norse world, craftsmen began to imitate Islamic designs and techniques, creating new styles that blended northern and eastern artistic traditions. The wealth from this trade helped fund the growth of trading towns like Hedeby and Birka, where the regular rhythm of commerce gradually replaced the more sporadic gains of raiding. As time passed, some Vikings even began to adopt elements of Islamic weights and measures, appreciating their precision and reliability. The standard weight unit used by Vikings in their silver transactions, the area, shows clear influences from Islamic measurement systems. This practical adoption of foreign customs reflects the pragmatic nature of Viking traders, who were willing to learn from the sophisticated commercial practices they encountered. The impact of this trade reached far beyond economics. The presence of Islamic coins, artifacts, and influences in Viking graves and settlements reveals how these connections gradually changed the way Norse people saw their place in the world. Their mental maps expanded to encompass distant lands and peoples, while their material culture grew richer and more diverse through these peaceful exchanges. As we rest here in our exploration of Viking Age trade, we can imagine the slow, steady movement of goods and ideas along these ancient routes, silver flowing northward like quiet streams, while furs and amber traveled south like autumn leaves on the wind. These trading connections would continue to shape Norse society until the end of the Viking Age, leaving an enduring legacy of cultural exchange between North and East. As Viking trade networks expanded across Europe and beyond, permanent settlements and trading centers began to emerge throughout Scandinavia. Picture the gradual transformation of simple seasonal marketplaces into bustling towns, where the salty breeze carried the sounds of merchants' calls and the creaking of loaded wagons along wooden streets. One of the earliest and most important of these centers was Hedeby, nestled in what is now northern Germany. Founded in the 8th century, its sheltered harbor welcomed ships from across the Norse world. Imagine walking through its busy streets in the 9th century, past workshops where craftsmen shaped amber and bone, their tools clicking steadily as they worked. The air would have been thick with wood smoke from forges and cooking fires, while the scent of leather from tanning yards mingled with the fresh pine of newly built houses. In Sweden, the settlement of Birka arose on Lake Mälaren, becoming a vital hub in the Eastern trade network. Archaeological evidence reveals rows of wooden houses and workshops, where skilled artisans crafted jewelry and worked with imported materials like silk and silver. The gentle lapping of waves against the shore would have provided a constant backdrop to the daily activities of its inhabitants, who numbered perhaps 1,000 at its peak around 850 CE. To the north, Koppang developed in Norway's Vestfold region, its name simply meaning marketplace in Old Norse. Here, merchants gathered to trade furs, walrus ivory, and local crafts for foreign luxuries. The sound of hammers shaping metal would have echoed across the water, while merchants conducted their business in a mixture of languages, Norse, Frisian, Saxon, and Slavic voices combining in the pursuit of trade. These early towns were carefully planned, with plots laid out in organized rows and protective ditches or walls surrounding the settlement. Wooden walkways were built to keep people above the mud, their boards weathering to a silver gray in the northern sun. Archaeological evidence shows that many houses were built close together, creating narrow streets where neighbors lived in close community. As these centers grew, they developed distinct zones for different activities. Craftsmen's quarters would buzz with the sound of work, the rhythmic tapping of metal workers, the whir of pottery wheels, the scraping of leather workers. Market areas would come alive each morning as traders set up their stalls, carefully arranging their wares, gleaming metals, colorful fabrics, aromatic spices, and precious stones from distant lands. The development of these trading centers marked a significant shift in Norse society. While many people continued to live on scattered farms, these new urban settlements created opportunities for specialized crafts and full-time merchants. Women played important roles in these communities, running households, participating in trade, and practicing crafts such as textile production. The steady whir of spindles and the clack of looms would have been constant sounds in many houses. Religious life also found expression in these new urban spaces. Early wooden churches began to appear alongside traditional pagan temples, reflecting the gradual religious changes taking place across Scandinavia. The sound of Christian bells would eventually join the calls of traders and the songs of skalds in the urban soundscape. By the late 10th century, Some of these trading centers had evolved into true towns, with permanent populations and complex social organizations. Dublin, York, and other settlements founded by Vikings abroad followed similar patterns of development, creating a network of interconnected urban centers across the Norse world. Each settlement adapted to local conditions while maintaining connections to the broader Norse culture through trade, language, and shared customs. These early urban centers laid the groundwork for many modern Scandinavian cities, their legacy visible in street patterns and place names that survive to this day. They represent a crucial transition in Norse society from purely rural settlements to a more complex urban civilization, where trade and crafts flourished alongside traditional farming and raiding activities. As Viking ships ventured ever westward across the cold waters of the North Atlantic, they discovered and settled a string of islands that would become new Norse homelands. This gradual expansion began around 860 CE, when Norse sailors first reached the Faroe Islands, those misty, windswept outposts between Scotland and Iceland. Picture the longships cutting through gray waves, their crews watching for the first glimpse of land through the sea spray. The Faroe Islands, with their green valleys nestled between rocky peaks, provided good grazing land for sheep and sheltered harbors for ships. Norse families built their farmsteads there, constructing sturdy wooden longhouses to withstand the fierce Atlantic winds. The smell of peat smoke would have drifted from their hearths as they adapted their farming and fishing practices to this new environment. From the Faroes, Norse explorers pressed further west. Around 870 CE, they reached Iceland, that land of ice and fire. The first permanent settler was Ingolfur Arnarson, who, according to tradition, cast his high-seat pillars into the sea and followed where they washed ashore, founding what would become Reykjavik. Over the next 60 years, during what became known as the settlement period, or landnam, thousands of Norse settlers arrived from Norway and the British Isles. These settlers brought with them not just their livestock and tools, but their entire way of life. They established farms in the sheltered valleys, built their traditional longhouses, and organized themselves into a unique form of commonwealth. The Icelandic Althing, established in 930 CE, became the world's first parliament, meeting each summer at Thingvellir, where the sound of voices debating law and settling disputes would echo across the plain. The settlement of Iceland brought significant environmental changes. The settlers cut down much of the island's limited birch forests for building material and fuel, while their sheep grazed the delicate vegetation. Yet they persisted, adapting their agricultural practices to the shorter growing season and harsh conditions. They learned to supplement their diet with fish from the rich coastal waters and birds from the cliffs. As the settlement of Iceland continued, some Norse explorers pushed even further west. Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland for manslaughter, discovered and explored the coast of Greenland in the 980s. When his exile ended, he returned to Iceland and organized a colonizing expedition, deliberately naming the ice-covered land Greenland to attract settlers. By 985 CE, the first Norse settlements were established along Greenland's southwestern fjords. The Greenland settlers faced even greater challenges than their predecessors in Iceland. They established two main settlements, the larger eastern settlement and the smaller western settlement, both actually on Greenland's southwest coast. Here, they built their farms in the limited areas of fertile land, constructing their homes from local stone and turf. The short growing season meant they had to carefully preserve their harvest and rely heavily on hunting seals, caribou, and fishing to survive the long, dark winters. These North Atlantic settlements maintained strong connections with Scandinavia, trading valuable Arctic products like walrus ivory, furs, and live falcons for essential supplies they couldn't produce themselves. Ships would make the dangerous journey across the Atlantic during the brief summer sailing season, bringing news and goods from the homeland. The Norse settlers in these Atlantic colonies maintained their language and customs, but also adapted to their new environments, developing unique cultural practices. They built their communities around the familiar structure of the thing assembly, maintained their oral traditions and stories, and continued to practice their crafts, though often using different materials than they had in Scandinavia. This period of North Atlantic settlement represents one of the most remarkable examples of medieval European expansion, demonstrating the Vikings' exceptional seafaring abilities and their capacity to adapt to new environments. Through careful observation of winds and currents, celestial navigation and courage, they established new communities across vast stretches of ocean, creating a network of Norse societies that would persist for centuries to come. Let us journey now to the remarkable story of Iceland's colonization, as Norse settlers gradually transformed an untamed wilderness into a new homeland. The settlement of Iceland, known as landnam or land-taking, began in earnest around 870 CE, though Norse sailors had discovered the island somewhat earlier. Picture the first settlers approaching the mysterious shores, their wooden ships creaking as they navigated the cold northern waters, catching sight of the rugged coastline emerging from the mist. Among the first permanent settlers was Ingolfur Arnarson, who, according to the medieval Landnámabók, arrived with his family around 874 CE. Following an ancient Norse custom, he cast his high-seat pillars into the sea and followed where they washed ashore, establishing his homestead at what would become Reykjavik. Imagine the quiet determination as his people built their first structures, the sound of axes chopping wood, and the warmth of their first fires in this strange new land. The settlement period lasted approximately 60 years, as more families gradually arrived from Norway and the British Isles. Many came seeking freedom from the increasing power of Harald Fairhair in Norway, bringing with them not just their families and livestock, but also their traditions, laws, and way of life. The settlers carefully chose their lands, seeking out areas with good grazing for their sheep and cattle, access to fresh water, and natural harbors for their ships. These early Icelandic settlers brought with them thralls, slaves captured during Viking raids, as well as Celtic wives and servants from Ireland and Scotland. This diverse origin of Iceland's settlers would leave a lasting genetic and cultural legacy. The sound of different languages and dialects would have mingled in these early settlements, as people from various backgrounds worked together to build a new society. The landscape they encountered was challenging but beautiful: vast stretches of tundra, dramatic volcanic formations, and thermal springs steaming in the cold air. The settlers learned to adapt their farming practices to the shorter growing season, focusing on raising hardy sheep and cattle rather than growing crops. They built their homes from turf and stone, creating thick walls that helped protect against the harsh winter winds. By 930 CE, most of the habitable areas of Iceland had been claimed, and the population had grown to perhaps 25,000 people. This year marked a crucial development: the establishment of the Althing, one of the world's oldest parliaments. Meeting each summer at Thingvellir, chieftains and free men would gather to make laws, settle disputes, and maintain social bonds. Imagine the atmosphere of these gatherings: the murmur of voices discussing important matters, the smell of cooking fires, and the sight of colorful tents spread across the plain. The settlers developed a unique social and political system, with no king but rather a commonwealth of free farmers led by local chieftains called Gathar. They preserved their Norse traditions while adapting them to their new circumstances. The art of storytelling flourished in the long winter nights, as people gathered in warm halls to share tales of their ancestors and the gods, stories that would later be written down as the Icelandic sagas. Life in early Iceland was not easy. Volcanic eruptions, harsh winters, and limited resources posed constant challenges. Yet the settlers persevered, developing strong social networks and systems of mutual support. They learned to use the island's natural resources wisely, harvesting driftwood from the beaches, fishing in the rich coastal waters, and gathering birds' eggs from coastal cliffs. As we drift through these memories of Iceland's settlement period, we can appreciate how these determined pioneers created not just a new society, but a unique culture that would preserve and transmit much of what we know about the Viking Age. Their experience represents a remarkable chapter in the story of Norse expansion, showing how raiders and traders could become settlers, adapting and thriving in one of the world's most challenging environments. As Norse settlers established themselves in Iceland, their gaze turned even further westward across the cold northern seas. Around 982 CE, a remarkable figure named Eric the Red embarked on a journey that would lead to the Viking settlement of Greenland. Having been exiled from Iceland for manslaughter, Eric sailed west, discovering and exploring the rocky, fjord-indented coastline of a vast new land. The gentle lapping of waves against wooden hulls accompanied the first Norse ships as they carefully navigated between towering icebergs, seeking sheltered harbors along Greenland's southwestern coast. Eric spent 3 years exploring this harsh but promising territory, identifying areas where settlements might thrive. Upon his return to Iceland in 985 CE, he deliberately named the land Greenland, hoping the appealing name would attract settlers to join his planned colonization. His strategy proved successful. In 986 CE, Eric led a fleet of 25 ships carrying around 500 settlers, their families and livestock westward toward Greenland. Though some vessels were lost to the treacherous northern seas, most reached their destination safely. The settlers established two main communities: the eastern settlement, Eystrabygd in modern-day Julianahab district, and the western settlement, Vestrabygd near present-day Godthab. Picture the slow, methodical work of these hardy pioneers as they built their new homes. Using techniques perfected in Norway and Iceland, they constructed sturdy longhouses of stone and turf, protecting them from the bitter Arctic winds. The settlers brought with them their traditional Norse way of life, including cattle, sheep, and goats, which grazed on the green summer pastures of the fjords. The Greenland colonies gradually grew and prospered. At their peak in the mid-12th century, they supported a population of perhaps 3,000 people spread across hundreds of farms. The settlers adapted their agricultural practices to the short growing season, supplementing their livestock farming with hunting of seals, caribou, and whales. They gathered berries and herbs during the brief summer months, carefully preserving food to sustain them through the long, dark winters. Daily life in Norse Greenland followed familiar patterns, yet was shaped by the unique challenges of their environment. Women spun wool and wove textiles, while men tended livestock and went on hunting expeditions. The settlements maintained strong connections with Iceland and Norway, trading valuable Arctic products like walrus ivory, polar bear furs, and seal skins for essential supplies such as iron and timber. The Greenlanders also established their own social and political structures. They held things assemblies to settle disputes and make decisions, following the Norse legal tradition. Christianity arrived with the first settlers, and around 1126 CE, Greenland received its first bishop, with a cathedral being built at Garðar in the eastern settlement. Archaeological evidence reveals the ingenuity of these Norse settlers as they adapted to their new home. Their buildings combined traditional Scandinavian designs with practical innovations for Arctic living. They developed specialized tools for hunting marine mammals and processing their catches. The remains of their farms show careful planning to maximize the use of limited arable land. Yet life in medieval Greenland was precarious. The settlers faced numerous challenges: isolation, harsh winters, limited resources, and eventually, changing climate conditions. They maintained their Norse cultural identity while developing new skills and technologies necessary for survival in the Arctic environment. Their story represents both the remarkable adaptability of Norse society and its limitations. The Greenland settlements persisted for nearly 500 years, demonstrating the remarkable resilience of Norse colonial culture. Their eventual abandonment in the 15th century came gradually, influenced by a complex combination of environmental, economic, and social factors. But during their centuries of existence, these settlements represented one of the most ambitious and far-reaching extensions of Norse civilization, pushing the boundaries of medieval European settlement to the very edges of the known world. As the Viking settlements in Greenland took root, their ships continued to push westward across the vast northern seas. Around the year 985, a merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson was blown off course while sailing from Iceland to Greenland. Through the misty waters and rolling waves, he glimpsed unfamiliar forested coastlines to the west lands that would later prove to be North America. The tales of these mysterious western shores sparked the imagination of Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red. In the year 1000, Leif purchased Bjarni's ship and gathered a crew of 35 men to explore these unknown territories. The wooden vessel creaked and swayed as they followed the path of Bjarni's earlier voyage, sailing through waters where seabirds wheeled overhead and whales breached in the distance. Their journey took them first to a rocky, barren land they named Helluland, likely modern-day Baffin Island. The stark landscape of stone and ice held little promise, so they continued southward. Next, they discovered a forested shore they called Markland, probably along the coast of Labrador, where tall timber grew in abundance, a precious resource for shipbuilding and construction. Sailing onward through calmer seas, they finally reached a verdant land of gentle meadows and rich forests. Here, in a place they named Vinland, they established a temporary settlement. The air was mild and sweet with the scent of wild grasses. They found wild grapes growing, or perhaps squashberries, which led to the name Vinland, Wine Land, or Land of Grapevines. The exact location was likely somewhere in northern Newfoundland. In the sheltered inlet of Elance Ox Meadows, archaeological evidence reveals the remains of Norse buildings, the only confirmed Viking settlement in North America. Here, skilled craftsmen constructed sturdy longhouses of timber and sod, their hands working with practiced efficiency as they created a home far from their northern lands. The settlement's great hall would have been filled with the warmth of hearth fires and the soft murmur of voices speaking Old Norse. The Vikings encountered indigenous peoples they called Skrælings, likely ancestors of the Beothuk or Mi'kmaq peoples. Initial trading encounters were peaceful, with the exchange of red cloth and milk products for furs. However, misunderstandings and conflicts eventually arose between the two groups, their different ways of life creating tension in this new land. Leif's brother Thorvald led another expedition to Vinland around 1004, spending 2 winters exploring the coastline. However, during a skirmish with the Skrælings, Thorvald was fatally wounded by an arrow, the first known European to be buried in North American soil. The sound of funeral songs must have echoed strangely in that foreign landscape. Between 1006 and 1011, Thorfinn Karlsefni led the largest attempt at permanent settlement, bringing 160 people including women and livestock. They lived in Vinland for 3 years, and the first European child was born in North America, Snorri Thorfinnsson, whose birth was celebrated in the wooden halls of their settlement. The settlers experienced both the abundance of the land and its challenges, gathering wild wheat in the meadows and fishing in the rich waters. Despite the promise of this new land, the settlements in Vinland proved unsustainable. The long sea journey from Greenland, conflicts with indigenous peoples, and the small number of settlers all contributed to their eventual abandonment. By 1020, the Vikings had withdrawn from North America, though their Greenland colonies continued for centuries. The legacy of these explorations lived on in Norse sagas, passed down through generations in the great halls of Iceland and Norway. These tales of Vinland, though partly forgotten by Europe, preserved the memory of a distant shore where brave sailors had briefly made a home. The quiet lapping of waves against wooden ships, the rustle of wind in unfamiliar forests, and the songs of unknown birds became part of the rich tapestry of Viking history, waiting to be rediscovered by later generations. As the Viking Age progressed into its middle period around 900 CE, significant political changes began reshaping Scandinavian society. The scattered chieftaincies and small kingdoms that had characterized the earlier era gradually gave way to more centralized forms of power and governance. Let us drift back to this time of transformation, when the foundations of medieval Scandinavian kingdoms were being laid, stone by stone, settlement by settlement. In Norway, Harald Fairhair emerged as a unifying force, bringing together various regions under a single crown by around 872 CE. Picture the great halls where local jarls and chieftains would gather, the flickering hearth fires casting long shadows as they debated allegiances and discussed the changing political landscape. The smell of wood smoke and mead would have filled these spaces as momentous decisions were made that would shape the future of the Norse lands. Denmark, too, was experiencing significant political development during this period. King Gorm the Old and his son Harald Bluetooth worked to consolidate Danish control, establishing a stronger centralized monarchy. The gentle sounds of construction would have echoed across the landscape as Harald commissioned the building of ring fortresses, known as Trelleborg fortresses, their circular wooden walls rising steadily against the sky. These impressive structures served both as symbols of royal power and as practical defensive positions. In Sweden, the process of unification was more gradual, with the regions of Svealand and Götaland slowly coming together. The ancient assembly grounds at Uppsala remained an important center of both political and religious life, where the sound of countless footsteps would have worn smooth paths between the great burial mounds as people gathered for things, the traditional Norse assemblies where laws were made and disputes were settled. The thing system itself was evolving during this period, becoming more formalized and hierarchical. Local things fed into regional assemblies, and in some areas, super-regional things emerged. Imagine the atmosphere at these gatherings, where free men would arrive from distant farms and settlements, their voices mixing with the autumn winds as they discussed matters of law and governance. The air would have been filled with the subtle sounds of wool cloaks rustling and the distant bleating of sheep in nearby fields. Christianity began to play an increasingly important role in political development during this period. Harald Bluetooth's conversion to Christianity around 965 CE marked a significant shift in Danish politics, aligning the kingdom more closely with continental European powers. The gradual introduction of Christian practices would have brought new sounds to the Norse landscape, the toll of bells, the chanting of monks, mixing with traditional songs and ceremonies. The political changes of this era were not always peaceful. Succession disputes and power struggles were common, though they were increasingly handled through legal mechanisms rather than purely through force of arms. The Thing assemblies would have heard countless cases of inheritance and authority, their decisions carrying the weight of law and tradition. As we move through this period, we can observe the emergence of more sophisticated administrative systems. The old practice of vigsla, where kings and jarls would travel between estates to collect tribute and maintain authority, began to give way to more permanent arrangements. Tax collection became more regularized, and royal officials began to appear in various regions. By the year 1000 CE, the political landscape of Scandinavia had been transformed. The foundations of medieval state structures were in place, though they retained distinctly Norse characteristics. The Thing system continued alongside new forms of royal authority, and local chieftains maintained significant power even as they acknowledged royal overlordship. These changes would have been felt in everyday life, as people adjusted to new power structures and administrative systems. The sound of coins being counted would have become more common as monetary economies developed, while the scratch of runes and eventually Latin letters recorded laws and agreements. Through it all, the steady rhythm of agricultural and maritime life continued, providing the economic foundation for these political developments. As we drift deeper into the story of how the Viking lands transformed into organized kingdoms, let us journey through the misty fjords and across the rolling hills of Scandinavia, where scattered chiefdoms gradually united into the realms we know today as Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. In Denmark, the process began earliest, with King Harald Bluetooth, who ruled from around 958 to 986 CE. Picture the Great Hall at Gelling, where Harold held court, its wooden beams rising high above the gathered nobles and warriors. The warmth of blazing hearths filled the space as Harold worked to unite the Danish lands, bringing together rival jarls and chieftains under his banner. The famous Gelling stones, still standing today, tell of his achievements in runic script, declaring how he won for himself all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. The gentle sounds of hammers and chisels would have echoed across the landscape as craftsmen carved these messages into the stone, while nearby, workers raised earthen mounds and constructed a massive ship-shaped monument that marked this place as the symbolic birthplace of the Danish kingdom. The scent of freshly cut timber filled the air as they built the first wooden churches, marking the gradual transition from the old ways to the new Christian faith. In Norway, the formation of a unified kingdom took a different path. Through the cool mists of time, we can envision King Harald Fairhair, who tradition tells us began the process of unification around 872 CE. Legend says he vowed not to cut or comb his hair until he had become sole ruler of Norway, and the sagas speak of how his flowing locks earned him his nickname. In the quiet fjords and valleys, local chieftains gradually submitted to his authority, some through peaceful agreements, others after facing his forces in battle. The work of unification continued under later kings like Hakon the Good and Olaf Tryggvason. Picture the long ships gliding through the fjords, carrying royal representatives to distant settlements, where they would gather the people at local thing assemblies. Here, under the open sky, with the scent of pine needles in the air and the sound of waves lapping against the shore, communities would discuss and debate their allegiance to the growing kingdom. Sweden's path to unity was perhaps the most gradual of all. The fertile plains of Uppland and the lakes of Mälaren region slowly became the center of what would become the Swedish kingdom. In these lands, we might have heard the steady footfalls of merchants traveling between trading centers like Birka and Sigtuna, their pack animals laden with furs, amber, and iron from the northern regions. The kings of the sphere gradually extended their influence over the Gerder people to the south, though this process would continue well beyond the Viking Age. Throughout all three regions, the formation of kingdoms brought significant changes to daily life. The simple wooden halls of local chieftains gave way to larger royal estates. Tax collectors began making regular visits to farms and villages, gathering resources to support the growing royal administration. The smell of ink and parchment began to mingle with more traditional scents in royal centers as literacy slowly spread, bringing new ways of recording laws and agreements. Christian churches arose alongside the old sacred groves, their bells calling people to worship across the countryside. The sound of coins being minted became more common as royal authority brought standardized currency to replace the earlier practice of using silver by weight. In markets and trading centers, merchants and craftsmen worked under the protection of royal law, their activities contributing to the growth of towns and cities. As night fell across these emerging kingdoms, people would gather in their homes, sharing stories of the old days of independence while adapting to their new reality as subjects of powerful kings. The transformation was gradual, like the slow changing of seasons, but it fundamentally altered the social and political landscape of Scandinavia, setting the foundation for the medieval kingdoms that would follow the Viking Age. Let us drift now to two great Viking capitals that emerged far from Scandinavia's shores, Dublin in Ireland and York in northern England. These cities became vibrant centers of Norse culture and commerce, where the ways of the Vikings merged with local traditions to create something entirely new. Dublin began as a Norse settlement in the mid-9th century, when Viking raiders established a longfort, or ship harbor, along the River Liffey. Picture the gentle lapping of waves against wooden ships, their dragon-headed prows rising from the misty waters. Over time, this military encampment grew into a thriving town called Dyflin by the Norse. The sounds of commerce filled the air, merchants calling out their wares, the rhythmic hammering of craftsmen, and conversations in both Norse and Irish tongues drifting through the streets. By the 10th century, Dublin had become a prosperous trading hub under its Norse kings. The most notable among them was Sigtryggr Silkbeard, who ruled from 989 to 1036. Under his steady guidance, Dublin grew into a true medieval city, with sturdy wooden houses lining the streets and stone churches rising above the rooftops. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the salty air as artisans worked silver into delicate jewelry, wove fine textiles, and crafted tools from iron and bronze. Meanwhile, far to the northeast, the city of York, known to the Vikings as Jorvik, had its own fascinating transformation. The Vikings first captured this former Roman and Anglo-Saxon city in 866 under the leadership of the great heathen army. Walking through Jorvik streets, one would have heard the familiar Norse language mixing with Old English, while the aroma of cooking fires and workshop forges filled the air. Archaeological evidence from Viking-age York reveals a bustling metropolitan center, where narrow lanes were lined with closely packed wooden buildings. Craftsmen worked in their workshops, creating everything from combs made of antler to fine metalwork. The marketplace would have been alive with activity, as traders from across the Viking world gathered to exchange goods: amber from the Baltic, furs from Russia, and fine weapons from Norse smiths. Under Viking rule, York became one of the largest cities in northern Europe, second only to London in England. The Vikings maintained and expanded the Roman walls and built new defensive structures to protect their capital. The gentle sound of church bells would have mingled with the calls to prayer from Norse temples, as Christianity and Norse beliefs existed side by side during this period of transition. Both Dublin and York served as more than just trading centers. They were cultural melting pots where Norse and local traditions blended together. In Dublin, Viking settlers gradually adopted Irish customs and intermarried with the local population, while maintaining their Norse identity. The same process occurred in York, where archaeological findings show a fascinating mix of Viking and Anglo-Saxon styles in everything from pottery to building techniques. These cities were connected by sea routes that formed part of a vast Viking trading network. Ships would sail between Dublin and York, carrying goods, people, and ideas. The journey across the Irish Sea could be challenging, but experienced Norse sailors knew how to read the waters and weather patterns, using the stars and sun to guide their way. As we rest here in these Viking capitals, we can imagine the daily life that once filled these streets: the merchants counting their silver coins, children playing among the wooden buildings, and ships coming and going in the harbors. The legacy of Viking rule can still be seen in both cities today, in their street layouts, place names, and archaeological remains that continue to reveal new insights into this fascinating period of history. The influence of these Viking capitals gradually waned as Norman power grew in England and Ireland, but their importance in the story of Viking-age Scandinavia cannot be overstated. They stand as testament to the Vikings' ability not just to raid and conquer, but to build, trade, and create new societies far from their homeland. As Viking settlements became established across their expanding world, a remarkable process of cultural integration and exchange began to unfold. Like gentle waves mixing different waters, Norse newcomers and local populations gradually blended together, creating rich new cultural tapestries that would shape medieval Europe. In England, this integration was particularly visible in the region known as the Danelaw. Here, Norse settlers adopted many Anglo-Saxon customs while maintaining elements of their own culture. The English language itself bears witness to this peaceful mingling, as Norse words like sky, egg, and window became permanently woven into everyday speech. In market towns and farming communities, Norse and Anglo-Saxon families lived side by side, sharing techniques for farming, crafting, and building. The process was especially evident in Ireland, where Viking settlers in Dublin and other coastal towns began to adopt Irish customs and fashions, By the mid-900s, archaeological evidence reveals how Norse women began wearing traditional Irish brooches and clothing styles, while Irish craftsmen incorporated Norse artistic motifs into their metalwork. The term Hiberno-Norse emerged to describe this unique cultural fusion, as marriages between Viking and Irish families became increasingly common. In Normandy, where Viking settlers had gained territory through the Treaty of St. Clair-sur-Epte in 911, the process of integration moved swiftly. Within just a few generations, these Norse newcomers had adopted the French language and customs, while maintaining their seafaring skills and entrepreneurial spirit. The Norman nobility, though descended from Vikings, became patrons of French culture and architecture, building magnificent stone churches and castles that blended Norse and Frankish influences. Throughout the Scottish Isles and coastal regions, Norse settlers established peaceful relationships with Pictish and Gaelic communities. In the Orkney and Shetland Islands, where Viking influence was particularly strong, the Norse language known as Norn would continue to be spoken until the 18th century. The island's place names still echo with Norse origins, quiet reminders of this ancient integration. In Russia, Swedish Vikings known as Rus became thoroughly integrated with Slavic populations, establishing trading networks along the river systems. In cities like Novgorod and Kiev, Norse merchants and warriors gradually adopted local customs and religious practices, while contributing their own technological and commercial expertise. The ruling dynasty that emerged would trace its lineage to the legendary Viking chieftain Rurik, while embracing Slavic culture and Orthodox Christianity. Archaeological evidence from across the Viking world reveals this pattern of integration through shared burial customs, mixed architectural styles, and hybrid art forms. In York, excavations have uncovered workshops where Norse and Anglo-Saxon craftsmen worked side by side, sharing techniques and artistic traditions. The famous Jellinge style of artwork, with its intricate animal patterns, spread beyond Scandinavia to influence art throughout the British Isles and beyond. Religious integration was another significant aspect of this cultural mixing. While many Vikings gradually accepted Christianity, they often maintained some traditional practices, creating a unique spiritual landscape. Churches were sometimes built on Old Norse sacred sites, and Christian symbols were incorporated into traditional Norse designs, creating a gentle transition between the old ways and the new. The integration process was not always smooth or peaceful, but over time, the distinctions between Norse settlers and local populations became increasingly blurred. Children of mixed marriages grew up speaking both languages, practicing both cultures' customs, and creating new traditions that combined elements of both worlds. This cultural flexibility and adaptability would become one of the most lasting legacies of the Viking Age. In the quieter moments of daily life, these integrated communities shared meals featuring both local and Norse cuisine, celebrated festivals that combined different traditions, and told stories that wove together different cultural threads. Through trade, marriage, and daily interaction, the Vikings and the peoples they encountered gradually created new societies that were neither purely Norse nor purely local, but something uniquely their own. As the Viking Age progressed into its later phases, a profound transformation began to sweep across Scandinavia, the gradual conversion to Christianity. This period, known as the Age of Conversion, would fundamentally reshape Norse society between 960 and 1066 CE, as the Old Norse religious traditions slowly gave way to Christian practices and beliefs. The process began in earnest when Harald Bluetooth, King of Denmark, embraced Christianity around 960 CE. According to tradition, he was convinced by a German missionary named Papo, who is said to have carried a red-hot iron bar to prove his faith. The massive Jelling stones, still standing in Denmark today, bear witness to this momentous change. Their runic inscriptions proclaim Harald's conversion and his bringing of Christianity to the Danish people. Like gentle waves lapping at ancient shores, the new faith spread gradually across the Nordic lands. In Norway, King Olaf Tryggvason, who ruled from 995 to 1000 CE, worked to establish Christianity throughout his realm. Having been baptized in England, he returned to Norway with priests and craftsmen, building churches where once stood pagan temples. The sound of church bells began to mingle with the familiar calls of seabirds along the fjords. The conversion was not always peaceful. Olaf Haraldsson, later known as Saint Olaf, used both persuasion and force to spread Christianity in Norway between 1015 and 1028 CE. Yet even in areas of resistance, the change often came slowly, with old and new beliefs existing side by side. Farmers might attend Christian services while still quietly leaving offerings at sacred groves. Their daily lives a blend of ancient customs and new practices. In Sweden, the process was particularly gradual. The trading center of Birka had hosted Christian missionaries as early as the 830s, when Ansgar, known as the Apostle of the North, established a small congregation. Yet it would be many generations before Christianity truly took hold across the Swedish lands. The temple at Uppsala remained an important pagan center well into the 11th century, its sacred wells and groves drawing people from far and wide. Iceland's conversion offers a unique glimpse into how such fundamental changes could be managed through discussion and compromise. At the Althing of 1000 CE, after careful debate and negotiation, the assembled chieftains agreed to adopt Christianity as the official religion, while allowing some pagan practices to continue in private. The sound of prayers in Latin began to echo across the volcanic landscape, while old stories of Thor and Odin were still whispered around evening fires. The material culture of the Viking world reflected these changes. Skilled craftsmen began creating crosses and other Christian symbols, often incorporating traditional Norse artistic styles. The great wooden stave churches, with their soaring timber architecture, combined Christian worship spaces with dragons and other motifs from Norse tradition. The scent of incense mixed with the familiar smell of worked wood in these remarkable buildings. As Christianity spread, it brought with it new forms of learning and writing. Monasteries were established, becoming centers of education and manuscript production. The Latin alphabet gradually supplemented the use of runes, though runic writing continued for everyday purposes. The rhythm of life began to follow the Christian calendar, with its festivals and fast days, while still maintaining connections to the agricultural cycles that had always governed Nordic life. This age of conversion marked the twilight of what we think of as the traditional Viking Age. Yet rather than a sharp break with the past, it was a time of gradual transformation, where old and new existed together like intertwined threads in a tapestry. The Norse people maintained much of their distinctive culture and identity, even as they embraced new beliefs and practices, creating a unique synthesis that would characterize medieval Scandinavian society. As Christianity gradually spread across Scandinavia, it brought profound changes to the Norse way of life, weaving new patterns into the cultural fabric of Viking society. The process was remarkably peaceful compared to many other regions, taking place over several generations through a combination of royal conversion, missionary work, and gradual cultural absorption. Let us drift back to the gentle slopes of Denmark, where King Harald Bluetooth made a momentous decision in the year 965. Standing before his people, he declared Christianity the official religion of his kingdom, though the old ways would continue alongside the new faith for many years to come. The great gelling stones still stand today, bearing witness to this transition, their runic inscriptions and carved images showing both Christ and Norse symbols, a perfect embodiment of this time of gradual change. In Norway, the process took a different path under kings Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson. The sound of church bells began to mix with the crash of waves along the fjords, as wooden stave churches rose alongside the traditional longhouses. These beautiful churches, with their steep-pitched roofs and intricate dragon-head carvings, represented a unique blend of Norse craftsmanship and Christian architecture. The scent of incense would gradually become as familiar as the smell of wood smoke from the hearth. Sweden's conversion was perhaps the most gradual of all, stretching well into the 12th century. In Uppsala, the great pagan temple stood until 1087, its golden chains tinkling in the breeze as both Christian and Norse prayers were offered within its walls. The missionary Ansgar had first brought Christian teachings to Birka in the 830s, planting seeds that would take generations to fully bloom. Picture the trading town of Sigtuna, where Norse merchants in their wool and leather garments would gather to hear both Christian priests and Norse skalds share their stories. The process of Christianization brought literacy and new forms of learning to Scandinavia. Monasteries began to appear like islands of tranquility in the northern landscape, their scriptoria filled with the quiet scratching of quills as monks preserved both Christian texts and, importantly, the Old Norse sagas and poems. The Latin alphabet gradually supplemented the runic writing system, though runes would continue to be used for centuries to come. Daily life began to change in subtle ways. The rhythm of the Christian calendar, with its festivals and fast days, began to overlay the traditional Norse celebrations. Sunday became a day of rest, though the old seasonal festivals were often incorporated into Christian holidays. The smell of baking bread for Christian communion mingled with the aroma of traditional feast dishes, creating new customs that bridged both worlds. The change was visible in burial customs as well. The great ship burials and burial mounds gradually gave way to Christian churchyards, though some families would continue to include both Christian crosses and Thor's hammers among grave goods, showing how the two belief systems could coexist in people's hearts and minds. The sound of Christian hymns began to blend with traditional Norse songs at funerals and celebrations. Architecture reflected these changes as well. Stone churches began to rise alongside wooden ones, their cool, quiet interiors offering new spaces for contemplation. Yet many of these churches incorporated Norse decorative elements, dragons, serpents, and other traditional motifs carved into their doors and roof beams, creating a unique Scandinavian Christian aesthetic that can still be seen today. Trading networks were affected too, as Scandinavian merchants found themselves more closely connected to Christian Europe. The soft clink of silver coins bearing Christian symbols became more common in marketplaces, while Christian artifacts like crosses and reliquaries became valued trade goods alongside traditional items. This period of religious transformation would have lasting effects on Scandinavian society, gradually shifting power structures and cultural practices while maintaining many distinctive Norse characteristics. The result was not a complete replacement of the old ways, but rather a unique synthesis that would shape Scandinavian culture for centuries to come. As Christianity gradually spread across Scandinavia, the process of cultural change and resistance created a fascinating tapestry of old and new beliefs, customs, and ways of life. Like gentle waves lapping at ancient shores, these changes didn't happen suddenly, but rather ebbed and flowed over generations, creating complex patterns of acceptance and resistance among different communities and social groups. In the quiet valleys and fjords of Norway, along the rolling plains of Denmark, and through the dense forests of Sweden, people grappled with transforming traditions that had guided their ancestors for centuries. The old ways of honoring Thor and Odin didn't simply disappear overnight. Instead, many families continued to wear Thor's hammer pendants beneath their new Christian crosses, whispering ancient prayers alongside new ones, like autumn leaves gradually giving way to winter snow. Archaeological evidence from this period, roughly 960 to 1100 CE, reveals this subtle blending of cultures. In countless homesteads, craftspeople created beautiful objects that combined Christian symbols with traditional Norse patterns. Imagine skilled hands carefully carving crosses decorated with intertwining dragon designs, or weaving tapestries where biblical scenes shared space with traditional Norse motifs. These artisans were bridging two worlds, creating something entirely new while preserving elements of the old. The resistance to cultural change took many forms, some quiet and some more dramatic. In Iceland, where the decision to convert to Christianity was made at the Althing in the year 1000, the agreement included important concessions. People could still practice the old religion in private, and certain traditional practices like eating horsemeat and exposing unwanted infants, though gradually discontinued, were initially permitted to continue. This compromise helped ease the transition, like a slow-moving stream gradually changing its course. In Sweden, particularly in the region of Uppsala, resistance to Christian influence remained strong well into the 11th century. The great temple at Uppsala, with its golden chains tinkling in the breeze and its sacred grove where sacrifices were made, continued to draw worshippers even as Christian churches were being built elsewhere. The Swedish king, Inge the Elder, faced significant opposition when he refused to participate in the traditional blot sacrifices around 1080 CE, temporarily losing his throne to his brother-in-law Blotswain, who upheld the old ways. The changes affected daily life in countless ways. Traditional burial practices, where the dead were laid to rest with their possessions in burial mounds or ships, gradually gave way to Christian interment in churchyards. The rhythm of life began to follow the Christian calendar rather than the old seasonal festivals, though many of these festivals were cleverly incorporated into Christian celebrations, their ancient meanings quietly preserved in new forms. Women's roles underwent significant changes during this period of transformation. While they maintained many of their traditional rights and responsibilities, the Christian Church brought new restrictions and different expectations. Yet in many areas, particularly in Iceland and Norway, women continued to exercise considerable influence in their communities, managing farms and participating in local decision-making, like strong roots holding firm despite changing winds above. The language itself reflected these cultural changes. New words entered the Norse vocabulary, bringing with them new concepts and ways of thinking. Yet the old stories, the sagas and poems that had been passed down through generations, continued to be told around evening fires, their words carrying ancient wisdom forward into a new age. Scribes began writing these tales down, preserving them in a form that would survive the centuries ahead. As we drift through these years of transformation, we can imagine the everyday experiences of people living through these changes. Picture a grandmother teaching her grandchildren both the old stories and the new prayers, or a merchant returning from abroad with tales of different customs and beliefs, each contributing to the gradual weaving of a new cultural fabric that would define the medieval North. As the Viking Age progressed through the late 10th and early 11th centuries, profound changes rippled through Scandinavian society, transforming the fabric of daily life in ways both subtle and dramatic. The old social structures, which had endured for generations, gradually shifted as new influences and pressures reshaped the Norse world. In the quiet halls and busy marketplaces of towns like Hedeby and Birka, the impact of increased trade and cultural exchange became ever more apparent. The traditional system of chieftains and free farmers began to give way to a more structured hierarchy, as wealthy merchants and Christian kings consolidated their power. The sounds of foreign languages, Old English, Frankish, and Slavic, mixed with Norse tongues in the bustling ports, while exotic goods from distant lands found their way into even modest households. The role of women in Viking society underwent notable changes during this period of transformation. While they had traditionally held significant authority in managing households and farms, the introduction of Christian practices gradually altered their legal status. Yet in many ways, Scandinavian women retained more rights and autonomy than their counterparts in other European societies, continuing to manage property and participate in trade well into the medieval period. The physical landscape itself reflected these societal changes. Where once stood wooden halls dedicated to Thor and Odin, stone churches began to rise, their bells marking the hours of Christian prayer. The traditional longhouses evolved, incorporating new architectural elements learned from abroad. In settlements across Scandinavia, the rhythm of daily life increasingly followed the Christian calendar rather than the old seasonal festivals. The warrior ethos that had defined much of Viking society began to shift as well. While martial prowess remained important, the emphasis gradually moved toward more organized military structures. The famous Viking raids became less frequent, replaced by more formal military campaigns led by kings rather than independent chieftains. The old system of temporary warbands gave way to more permanent military retinues, bound by oaths of loyalty to their rulers. Trade networks, which had always been important, became increasingly sophisticated. The silver that once flowed into Scandinavia through raiding now came through peaceful commerce. Markets in towns like Ribe and Koppang grew larger and more organized, with permanent shops replacing occasional trading posts. The skills of craftsmen evolved as they incorporated new techniques and styles learned from foreign artisans, creating a distinctive blend of Norse and international influences. The legal system also underwent significant changes. The traditional thing meetings, where free men gathered to settle disputes and make laws, gradually incorporated Christian principles and royal authority. Written laws began to supplement oral traditions, though the process was gradual and varied across different regions. The old practice of weregild compensation for crimes continued, but was modified to align with Christian concepts of justice. Family life and social relationships evolved as new ideas about marriage and kinship spread through society. The practice of concubinage declined, while Christian marriage became the norm among the elite and gradually filtered down through society. The extended family networks that had been crucial to Viking society remained important, but began to be supplemented by new forms of social organization centered around the church and royal authority. Education and knowledge transmission changed as literacy spread, initially through religious institutions. The rich oral traditions of the Norse people, their sagas, poems, and histories began to be written down, preserving them for future generations while subtly transforming them in the process. Monasteries became centers of learning, introducing new ideas and technologies to Scandinavian society. Through all these changes, the fundamental resilience and adaptability of Norse society remained evident. Rather than simply replacing old ways with new ones, the Vikings often found ways to blend different influences, creating something uniquely their own. This period of transformation laid the groundwork for the medieval Scandinavian kingdoms while preserving elements of the distinct Norse cultural identity that had developed over centuries. As we drift into the later years of the Viking Age, let us explore how the Norse influence continued to shape medieval Europe, particularly through the remarkable story of the Normans. These Norsemen, who had settled in northern France, a century earlier had transformed themselves into a powerful and sophisticated medieval culture, while maintaining their Viking roots of bold expansion and martial prowess. In the gentle morning mists of Normandy, around the year 1000, Duke Richard II ruled over a prosperous realm where Norse traditions had blended seamlessly with Frankish customs. The great stone keeps and churches rising from the Norman countryside stood as testament to how far these descendants of Vikings had come from their seafaring ancestors. Yet the old warrior spirit remained, expressing itself in new ways through mounted knights and ambitious conquests. Let us follow the slow but steady expansion of Norman influence across Europe. In 1016, groups of Norman knights began traveling to southern Italy, where they found a complex tapestry of Byzantine, Lombard, and Muslim powers. Among these adventurers was the noble house of Hauteville, whose sons would carve out new kingdoms under the warm Mediterranean sun. Robert Guiscard, one of the most successful Hauteville brothers, gradually built a Norman realm in southern Italy and Sicily through a combination of military skill, political cunning, and diplomatic marriages. The gentle lapping of waves against ships' hulls could still be heard as Norman vessels crossed the Mediterranean, but now they carried knights in chainmail rather than raiders in leather armor. The Norman conquest of Sicily, beginning in 1061 under Roger Hauteville, created a unique civilization where Norman, Byzantine, and Islamic cultures merged in architecture, art, and governance. The golden mosaics of Palermo's churches would shimmer in the southern sunlight, telling stories of this remarkable cultural fusion. Perhaps the most significant Norman expansion came in 1066, when Duke William of Normandy launched his famous conquest of England. Picture the autumn leaves falling gently on the Sussex countryside as William's army faced Harold Godwinson's English forces at Hastings. The Norman victory there would transform England's social, political, and linguistic landscape for centuries to come. Stone castles rose across the English countryside, while Norman French mixed with Old English in the courts and marketplaces, slowly evolving into Middle English. During these same years, the traditional Viking homelands were experiencing their own transformations. In Denmark, King Sweyn Estridsson worked to strengthen royal authority and church organization between 1047 and 1076. The wooden churches dotting the Danish landscape were gradually replaced by stone structures, their bells calling the faithful to prayer across increasingly Christian kingdoms. In Norway, King Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king, pursued his ambitious dreams of conquest until his death at Stamford Bridge in 1066. Through the quiet Norwegian forests and fjords, changes were flowing like spring streams as traditional Viking practices gave way to medieval Christian customs. The skalds still sang in royal halls, but their verses increasingly honored saints alongside ancient heroes. Sweden's transformation came more gradually, with kings like Ingi the Elder working to strengthen both royal power and Christian influence through the latter decades of the 11th century. Trade routes still connected Sweden to lands far to the east, but now merchants were more likely to carry Christian crosses alongside their silver coins. As the century drew to a close around 1100, the Viking Age was gently fading into medieval history. Yet its legacy lived on through the Norman kingdoms of England and Sicily, through the stone churches of Scandinavia, and through the countless stories and traditions that had been carried across seas and generations. The Norse spirit of exploration and adaptation had found new expressions in these transformed societies, where the descendants of Vikings had become the architects of medieval Europe's most dynamic kingdoms. Let us drift back to a pivotal moment in the intertwined histories of England and the Norse world, as the autumn leaves fell in 1066. The Norman conquest of England represents a fascinating culmination of centuries of Viking influence, for the Normans themselves were descendants of Norse settlers who had made northern France their home generations earlier. Picture the calm before the storm, as Edward the Confessor's death in January 1066 set in motion a series of events that would forever change the course of English history. Harold Godwinson, with strong ties to both Anglo-Saxon and Danish nobility, ascended to the throne, but his reign would prove to be one of the shortest in English history. Across the Channel, William, Duke of Normandy, grandson of Viking chieftain Rollo who had settled in France, claimed the English crown for himself. The Norman court still retained traces of its Norse heritage in their shipbuilding techniques, some of their vocabulary, and their warrior traditions, though they had largely adopted French culture and language. Imagine the gentle lapping of waves against wooden hulls as William's massive invasion fleet of nearly 700 ships gathered at the mouth of the River Dives. The autumn winds carried the scent of salt air and timber as thousands of warriors prepared for the crossing. These ships, though different from their Viking ancestors' vessels, still showed the influence of Norse shipbuilding expertise in their sturdy construction and seaworthy design. Meanwhile, Harold Godwinson faced another challenge from the north, as Harald Hardrada of Norway launched his own bid for the English throne. The Norwegian king, accompanied by Harold's own brother Tostig, sailed up the River Ouse with a fleet of perhaps 300 ships, their dragon-headed prows cutting through the misty waters of northern England. The peaceful Yorkshire countryside was soon disturbed by the thunder of battle at Stamford Bridge. On that warm September day in 1066, Harold Godwinson's forces achieved a decisive victory over the Norwegian army, ending the last major Viking invasion of England. Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king, fell in battle, and with him died the dream of a Norse-ruled England. But Harold had little time to rest. Word came of William's landing at Pevensey, and his army had to march south immediately. Imagine the weariness of those soldiers as they covered nearly 250 miles in just a few days, their boots worn and their spirits tested by the urgent pace. The Battle of Hastings on October 14, 1066, unfolded on the gentle slopes of Senlac Hill. The autumn sun watched over a transformation of England's future as William's Norman forces, combining Norse warrior tradition with French cavalry tactics, gradually wore down the Anglo-Saxon shield wall. As evening approached, Harold Godwinson fell, and with him, the Anglo-Saxon era drew to a close. In the years that followed, William's Norman administration gradually transformed England. The new Norman aristocracy, though no longer speaking Norse, carried in their customs and laws echoes of their Viking ancestors. They built stone castles across the landscape, introduced new forms of government, and established a feudal system that would shape English society for centuries to come. The Norman conquest represents a unique closing chapter in the Viking Age Norse descendants, now thoroughly Frankified, completing what their ancestors had begun through raids and settlements 2 centuries earlier. The great tapestry of English society was rewoven, incorporating threads of Anglo-Saxon, Danish, and Norman influence into a new cultural fabric. Consider how the great stone keeps and churches that rose across England in the decades following 1066 stood as testament to this transformation. In their halls, Norman nobles who could trace their ancestry to Viking raiders now governed as French-speaking aristocrats, while in the fields and villages, English peasants continued their ancient ways of life, gradually adapting to their new masters. This profound change marked not just an end, but also a beginning, the sunset of the Viking Age coinciding with the dawn of a new medieval era in English history. The Norse influence, though transformed, would continue to shape English culture, language, and law for generations to come, a lasting legacy of those distant days when longships first appeared on the horizon. Let us now turn our attention to the northern reaches of the British Isles, where Viking influence would leave an indelible mark on the landscapes and peoples of Scotland and Ireland. As the gentle waves lapped against the shores of these ancient lands, Norse settlers and raiders gradually wove themselves into the fabric of Celtic society, creating a rich tapestry of cultural exchange that would endure for centuries. Beginning in the late 8th century, Viking ships first appeared along the Scottish and Irish coasts, their distinctive dragon-headed prows emerging from the morning mists. The monastery of Iona, with its peaceful stone buildings and illuminated manuscripts, was among the first to experience Norse raids in 795. The quiet halls of learning, where monks had long labored over their precious books, would see repeated visits from seafaring Norsemen over the coming decades. In the northern Isles of Scotland, the Vikings found lands that reminded them of their Scandinavian homes. The archipelagos of Orkney and Shetland became particularly important Norse settlements, their green fields and sheltered harbors offering familiar comfort to the newcomers. Here, the Norse earls established their power base, building longhouses whose hearth fires warmed their inhabitants through the long northern nights. The islands would remain under Norse control until 1468, when they were transferred to Scottish control as part of a marriage dowry. The Western Isles, or Hebrides too, fell under Viking influence, becoming known in Norse sources as the Southrejar, or Southern Islands. Here, amid the windswept beaches and rocky headlands, a distinctive Norse Gaelic culture emerged. The Lord of the Isles, who would later rule these territories, traced their lineage to both Norse and Celtic ancestors, embodying the gradual blending of these two worlds. In Ireland, Viking activity began with raids but evolved into something more permanent. The first recorded Viking raid on Ireland occurred in 795, targeting Rathlin Island off the northern coast. As time passed, the Norse established coastal settlements that would grow into important trading centers. Dublin, founded by the Vikings in 841, became a bustling port where Norse merchants traded amber, furs, and slaves for local goods. The sound of Norse and Irish voices mingled in its streets, while ships from across the known world anchored in its harbor. Other Viking settlements appeared along Ireland's coast. Waterford, Wexford, Limerick, and Cork all trace their origins to Norse founders. These towns, with their distinctive layout of narrow lanes leading to protected harbors, became centers of commerce and cultural exchange. The Vikings brought new shipbuilding techniques, trading networks, and urban planning concepts to Ireland, while adopting elements of Irish culture and craftsmanship. In the quiet countryside between these settlements, Norse farmers gradually integrated with local communities. They adopted Irish farming methods while introducing their own agricultural innovations. The legacy of this integration can still be heard in place names and seen in archaeological remains, silver hoards, decorated weapons, and jewelry that combine Norse and Celtic artistic styles. The Kingdom of Dublin, established by the Norse Gael dynasty, became particularly influential. Under rulers like Sigtryg Silkbeard, who reigned from 989 to 1036, Dublin maintained connections with both the Norse world and Irish kingdoms. The great stone church of Christ Church Cathedral, whose foundations were laid by Sigtryg, stood as a testament to this cultural fusion, its bells calling to both Norse and Irish worshippers. In Scotland, Norse influence extended beyond the northern and western Isles. The mainland regions of Caithness and Sutherland saw significant Norse settlement, their place names still echoing with Old Norse words for valleys, farms, and fjords. The peaceful absorption of Norse customs and technologies into local life created a unique hybrid culture that would persist long after the Viking Age had ended. As we reflect on this period of transformation, we can imagine the gradual changes that took place, the slow adoption of new ways of life, the intermarriage of peoples, the sharing of stories and traditions around evening fires. The Viking influence in Scotland and Ireland was not simply one of conquest and change, but of adaptation and integration, creating lasting connections that would shape these lands for generations to come. As the Viking Age drew toward its close in the late 11th and early 12th centuries, the era of large-scale raids and expeditions gradually faded like the setting of a northern sun. Yet before this remarkable period came to an end, several significant campaigns and journeys marked the final chapter of Viking expansion and exploration. Among the last major Viking expeditions was Magnus Barefoot's ambitious campaign to the British Isles between 1098 and 1103. Magnus, the King of Norway, led his fleet through the familiar Western Sea routes, where countless Norse ships had sailed before. His vessels glided through the misty waters of the Irish Sea, their wooden hulls cutting through waves that had long known the touch of Viking keels. He reasserted Norwegian control over the Orkney Islands, their green shores rising from the gray waters like emerald jewels set in silver. The sound of Magnus's oars echoed across the waters of the Hebrides, where he secured Norwegian dominion over these scattered Scottish isles. His ships pressed onward to the Isle of Man, where the salt spray carried tales of earlier Viking settlers who had made these lands their home. The Norwegian king's final campaign would take him to Ireland, where he established control over Dublin, though this would prove to be one of the last significant Norse military actions in the region. In the eastern Baltic, the waters still rippled with Viking activity into the early 12th century. Swedish Vikings, known as Varangians, continued their journeys along the rivers of Eastern Europe, though their roles had evolved from raiders to traders and mercenaries. The gentle lapping of water against their ships' sides marked familiar routes to Constantinople, where the Varangian Guard still served as elite bodyguards to the Byzantine emperors, their axes gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. One of the final large-scale Viking expeditions was the Norwegian Crusade led by Sigurd I Magnusson, also known as Sigurd the Crusader, between 1107 and 1111. Unlike the raids of earlier centuries, this journey combined the Viking maritime tradition with the new Christian ideals that had taken root in Scandinavia. Sigurd's fleet of 60 ships sailed from Norway, their dragon-headed prows pointing toward distant horizons that their ancestors had once approached with different intentions. The sounds and scents of different lands filled the air as Sigurd's fleet made its way through the Mediterranean. The crews experienced the warm winds of southern Europe, so different from the cool breezes of their homeland. They visited England and France, wintered in Galicia, and helped the Portuguese fight against the Moors. The expedition continued to the Holy Land, where Norse warriors who had once raided Christian churches now fought to protect Christian territories. As these final expeditions unfolded, the nature of Scandinavian society was transforming. The smell of harbor markets replaced the smoke of raid-burned settlements. The sounds of trading vessels and merchant conversations echoed where once battle cries had rung out. The old ways of raiding were giving way to more established patterns of trade and diplomatic relations. In the Baltic Sea region, the island of Gotland became an increasingly important trading center, its harbors filled with ships carrying amber, furs, and silver rather than warriors and weapons. The gradual transition from raiding to trading was reflected in the changing architecture of coastal settlements, as defensive walls slowly gave way to merchant warehouses and market squares. The last echoes of traditional Viking expeditions faded into history by the mid-12th century. The descendants of the raiders had become rulers, traders, and settlers across a vast network of territories. The skills that had once guided longships on raids were now employed in merchant ventures and political missions. The sound of sword on shield was replaced by the clink of coins and the scratch of quills recording trade agreements. This transformation marked not an end, but an evolution of Norse influence across Europe. The maritime expertise, craftsmanship, and adventurous spirit that had characterized the Viking Age found new expressions in the medieval kingdoms and trading networks that followed, leaving an indelible mark on the histories of countless lands touched by these final expeditions. As the Viking Age gradually drew to a close, its profound influence continued to ripple outward through time, leaving an indelible mark on the cultures and societies it had touched. Like gentle waves spreading across still waters, the legacy of the Norse people shaped language, law, art, and daily life in ways that continue to resonate through the centuries. In the realm of language, the Norse influence flows like a quiet stream through modern English. Words like sky, egg, knife, and window whisper their Scandinavian origins, while place names ending in by, thorpe, and toft scatter across the British landscape like fallen leaves, marking ancient Norse settlements. In the north and east of England, where Viking influence was strongest, local dialects still carry echoes of Old Norse in their grammar and vocabulary. The Norse system of law and governance left lasting impressions as well. The Thing Assembly, where free people gathered to make decisions and settle disputes, influenced the development of parliamentary democracy. In places like the Isle of Man and Iceland, these assemblies continued well into modern times, like ancient trees with roots reaching deep into Viking soil. The concept of jury trials and the importance of sworn testimony found their way into English common law, carried forward through time like precious inherited wisdom. In the realm of art and craftsmanship, the Vikings' distinctive aesthetic sensibilities wove themselves into the fabric of medieval European culture. Their intricate interlacing patterns, animal motifs, and elegant ship designs continued to inspire artists and craftspeople long after the Viking Age had passed. The graceful curves and complex knots of Norse art can still be seen in modern jewelry, architecture, and decorative arts, like ancient patterns being continuously redrawn. The Vikings' maritime expertise and shipbuilding technology transformed naval architecture throughout northern Europe. Their revolutionary clinker-built ships, with overlapping planks and flexible hulls, influenced boat-building traditions that would persist for centuries. The legacy of their seamanship lives on in nautical terminology and in the deep connection between coastal communities and the sea. In literature and storytelling, the Norse sagas and myths have enriched world culture like a vast treasure hoard of tales and wisdom. The stories of gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya have inspired countless works of art, literature, and entertainment. The complex characters and moral dilemmas found in the Icelandic sagas continue to resonate with modern readers, their psychological depth and narrative sophistication flowing through time like clear spring water. The Vikings' trading networks and urban developments laid foundations for many modern cities. Dublin, York, and Kiev grew from Viking trading posts into vibrant metropolitan centers. The commercial practices they established, including standardized weights and measures, helped shape medieval commerce and beyond. Their influence on urban planning can still be traced in street layouts and property boundaries, like ancient footprints preserved in stone. In the realm of craft and technology, Viking innovations in metalworking, especially in iron and steel production, influenced European metallurgy for generations. Their practical solutions to everyday challenges, from house construction to tool design, demonstrated an ingenuity that would be passed down through generations of craftspeople. The genetic and cultural legacy of the Vikings flows like quiet blood through the veins of many modern populations. DNA studies reveal the extent of Norse settlement and integration, while family names and traditions carry forward ancient connections. In regions like Normandy, the Danelaw, and the Northern Isles of Scotland, this heritage remains particularly strong, like an ancient melody that continues to play softly through time. As we rest here in contemplation of this rich legacy, we can sense how the Viking Age was not merely a period of raids and conquests, but a time of profound cultural exchange and development. Their influence, like gentle evening tide, continues to wash upon the shores of our modern world, leaving behind treasures of language, law, art, and wisdom for us to discover anew. As the Vikings settled and traded across vast territories, they left an indelible mark not only through their physical presence, but through their words and laws, weaving their language and legal customs into the fabric of medieval society. Let us explore how their influence still echoes through the words we speak and the principles of justice that evolved in their wake. The Norse language, carried across seas and settlements, merged gracefully with local tongues, leaving lasting impressions that persist to this day. In England, where Viking influence was particularly strong, hundreds of place names still bear witness to their presence. The suffix by, meaning town or settlement, appears in places like Derby, Whitby, and Rugby. Thorpe, meaning outlying farmstead, lives on in names like Scunthorpe and Grimsthorpe. The gentle hills and valleys of Yorkshire are dotted with places ending in thwaite, from the Norse word for clearing, while dale, meaning valley, graces numerous locations across northern England. Common words in modern English that originated from Old Norse flow through our daily speech like a quiet stream. Words like sky, egg, knife, window, and husband. Even our days of the week carry Norse mythology within them. Thursday honors Thor, while Wednesday remembers Odin Woden. The language of the Vikings settled so deeply into English that it influenced basic pronouns, with they, them, and their all having Norse origins. In the realm of law and governance, the Vikings brought with them sophisticated legal traditions that would help shape medieval justice systems. The Thing, their assembly for making laws and settling disputes, established principles of representative governance that would echo through centuries. In places like Iceland, where the Althing gathered at Thingvellir, these assemblies created a form of early democracy, where free men could voice their concerns and participate in decision-making. The Viking legal system was built upon concepts of compensation rather than punishment alone. The carefully calculated weregild, literally, man payment, provided a systematic way to resolve conflicts through monetary compensation rather than blood feuds. This practical approach to justice helped maintain social order and prevent endless cycles of vengeance. In northern England, the Danelaw region operated under Norse-influenced legal customs, introducing concepts like the hundred, an administrative district, and the lawman, a legal official who helped maintain order. The jury system, while not directly created by the Vikings, was strengthened by their tradition of calling upon local men to witness and judge disputes. The Vikings' influence on language and law spread across their trading networks like ripples on still water. In Russia, where Swedish Vikings known as Rus traded and settled, their legal customs influenced early Russian law codes. The Russkaya Pravda, compiled in the 11th century, showed clear Norse influences in its approach to compensation and social organization. In Ireland and Scotland, Norse words wove themselves into Gaelic, particularly in terms relating to shipping and fishing. Words like bat, boat, and skip, ship, found their way into local languages, while Norse legal concepts influenced the development of maritime law along the coasts. The Vikings' approach to law and justice reflected their practical nature and their understanding of human relationships. Their system of compensation acknowledged the reality of conflict while providing structured ways to resolve it. Their thing assemblies created spaces for community participation in governance, a concept that would influence later medieval parliaments and councils. As we drift through these linguistic and legal legacies, we can see how the Vikings' influence continues to shape our world in subtle ways. Their words remain on our lips, their place names mark our landscapes, and their legal principles echo in modern concepts of justice and governance. Like ancient runes carved in stone, these influences have endured through centuries, reminding us of the lasting impact of these Norse settlers, traders, and raiders on the societies they touched. Let us gently explore the remarkable archaeological discoveries that have illuminated our understanding of the Viking Age, as patient excavations and careful research continue to reveal new insights into this fascinating period of history. Like pieces of an ancient puzzle slowly coming together, each artifact and site tells its own quiet story of the past. In the rich soil of Scandinavia, archaeologists have uncovered countless treasures that speak to us across the centuries. Perhaps most famous are the magnificent ship burials, like the Oseberg ship discovered in Norway in 1904. This extraordinarily well-preserved vessel, buried in 834 CE, contained not only the remains of two high-status women, but also intricate wood carvings, textiles, and everyday objects that paint a vivid picture of Viking life. The peaceful waters of Roskilde Fjord in Denmark yielded 5 Viking ships, deliberately scuttled to block the channel against enemy attacks. These vessels, now carefully preserved in the Viking Ship Museum, reveal the masterful shipbuilding techniques that enabled Norse seafaring. The careful examination of their wooden planks and iron rivets shows us how these remarkable vessels were constructed, each piece fitting together with precise craftsmanship. In the quiet fields of Birka, Sweden, archaeologists have uncovered a vast trading center, where the gentle layers of soil preserved thousands of artifacts from distant lands, Arabic coins, Byzantine silks, and delicate glass beads. Each item tells its own story of far-reaching trade networks and cultural connections that span continents. The peaceful countryside of York, England, once the Viking city of Jorvik, has revealed extraordinarily well-preserved remains of Viking Age streets, houses, and workshops. The waterlogged conditions preserved organic materials like leather, wood, and textiles, allowing us to see the actual objects used in daily life: wooden bowls still bearing knife marks from ancient meals, leather shoes worn by long-ago feet, and combs made from antler with fine teeth for removing lice. Recent years have brought new discoveries through modern technology. Metal detectorists have located numerous hoards of silver coins and jewelry, like the magnificent Vale of York hoard found in 2007, containing over 600 coins and precious objects from as far away as Afghanistan. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed the outlines of great halls and settlements beneath the earth, including the discovery of a massive Viking ship burial at Gjellestad, Norway, in 2018. On the island of Gotland, over 700 silver hoards have been found, speaking to the incredible wealth that flowed through Viking trade networks. Many contain Islamic dirhams, tangible evidence of the extensive trading connections that reached far into the East. Each coin bears silent witness to long journeys and complex exchanges across vast distances. Archaeological evidence has also revealed the more peaceful aspects of Viking life. The farms where families tended their crops and livestock, the workshops where craftspeople created beautiful objects, and the harbors where ships came to rest after long voyages. At Ribe in Denmark, excavations have uncovered evidence of craft production, including glass beading, metalworking, and amber working, showing the sophisticated urban life of Viking-age towns. The graves of Vikings have yielded particularly intimate insights into their lives and beliefs. From simple farmstead burials to elaborate chamber graves, each tells us something about the individual and their society. The objects placed with the dead, weapons, tools, jewelry, and everyday items, reflect both their earthly status and their beliefs about the afterlife. Modern scientific techniques continue to reveal new details about Viking life. Analysis of teeth and bones tells us about diet and health, while studies of preserved textiles reveal sophisticated weaving techniques and fashion choices. DNA analysis helps us understand population movements and family relationships, while isotope analysis of bones can tell us where individuals grew up and traveled during their lives. As we drift toward sleep, let us appreciate how these carefully preserved traces of the past help us understand the rich tapestry of Viking-age life, each artifact a small window into a world both distant and surprisingly familiar. These silent witnesses to history continue to speak to us, revealing new stories with each careful discovery. As we drift toward the end of our journey through Viking-age Scandinavia, let us gently explore how our modern understanding of this fascinating period has evolved, and how we continue to separate historical fact from popular misconception. Like fog gradually lifting from a northern fjord, recent decades of research and archaeological discoveries have revealed a far more nuanced and complex picture than the simplified raiders in horned helmets that once dominated popular imagination. Let us rest a moment and consider that the very term Viking has been misunderstood. It was originally an activity. To go Viking meant to go on expeditions, whether for trade or raid rather than an ethnic or cultural identity. The people we call Vikings would have identified themselves by their specific regions as Danes, Norwegians, or Svir, or by their local communities and family connections. In the quiet of our thoughts, we can dispel one of the most persistent misconceptions: the horned helmet. No Viking-age helmet with horns has ever been discovered, and no contemporary historical source depicts warriors wearing such headgear. The horned helmet myth emerged in the 19th century, particularly through costume designs for Wagner's Ring Cycle operas and romantic nationalist artwork of the Victorian era. As we settle more deeply into our understanding, we find that Viking society was far more sophisticated than often portrayed. These were not merely brutal warriors, but skilled craftspeople, merchants, farmers, and settlers. Their ships were not crude vessels but masterpieces of engineering, capable of crossing oceans while drawing only a few feet of water. Their artistic achievements in metalwork, wood carving, and textile creation speak to a culture that deeply valued beauty and technical skill. The role of women in Viking society has been particularly illuminated by modern research. Far from being passive observers, Norse women held significant legal rights, could own property, and in some cases commanded respect as merchants, landowners, and even warriors. The recent discovery of high-status female burials with weapons has led to renewed discussion about gender roles in Viking Age society. Drifting further into our exploration, we find that Viking Age people were not isolated barbarians, but were connected to vast trading networks stretching from North America to the Middle East. They were adaptable and curious, readily incorporating new ideas, technologies, and cultural practices from the lands they encountered. Their settlements from Dublin to Kiev became important centers of cultural exchange and urban development. Modern DNA studies have revealed that Viking Age movements of people were more complex than previously thought. Rather than simple raids and invasions, there was significant peaceful migration and integration with local populations. The genetic legacy of the Vikings can be found not only in Scandinavia, but across Europe and beyond, telling a story of gradual settlement and intermarriage rather than just conquest. As we rest in this knowledge, we can appreciate how archaeological evidence has shown that Viking Age settlements were often centers of craft production and trade, with sophisticated urban planning and international connections. York, Dublin, and other Viking towns were not crude outposts but vibrant medieval cities with diverse populations and complex economies. The religious life of Viking Age people was also more nuanced than the simple paganism to Christianity narrative often presented. Archaeological evidence shows long periods of coexistence between belief systems, with people adapting and combining religious practices in ways that made sense to their communities and daily lives. As our journey through Viking Age Scandinavia draws to a close, we can appreciate how modern scholarship has revealed a society that was complex, interconnected, and sophisticated. The Vikings were neither simple barbarians nor noble savages, but real people navigating a changing world with skill, adaptability, and human complexity. Their legacy lives on not just in popular culture, but in the very foundations of many modern societies, their influence flowing through time like the currents that once carried their ships across the seas. As our long journey through the Viking Age draws to a close, let us rest for a moment and reflect on the vast tapestry of history we have explored together. Like the gentle waves that carried Norse ships across distant seas, time flows ever onward, carrying the stories of countless lives through the centuries to reach our shores today. We began in the misty fjords of pre-Viking Scandinavia, where communities of farmers, craftspeople, and seafarers laid the foundations for an age of remarkable transformation. Through their ingenuity in shipbuilding and their courage to venture beyond the horizon, these northern peoples would reshape the medieval world in ways that still echo through time. Like rings in ancient tree trunks, the cycles of history reveal themselves in patterns: the flow of people seeking new homes, the exchange of goods and ideas across vast distances, the gradual blending of cultures and beliefs. We witnessed how raids gave way to trade, how settlers became citizens, how the warriors of yesterday became the farmers and merchants of tomorrow. In this way, the Viking Age mirrors countless chapters in humanity's story, times of great change, when people ventured forth to find their place in an expanding world. The Norse ships that once crossed the North Atlantic still speak to us of human ingenuity and determination. From the workshops of skilled craftsmen emerged vessels that could weather fierce storms and navigate treacherous coasts, carrying their crews to lands that existed only in dreams and tales. These same ships that struck fear into the hearts of monastery dwellers also carried traders bearing amber and furs, poets sharing ancient stories, and settlers seeking peaceful homes among new neighbors. Through our journey, we've seen how the Viking Age was not simply a time of raids and warfare, but a complex period of cultural exchange and transformation. In the marketplaces of Hedeby and Birka, in the streets of York and Dublin, in the river ports along the way to Constantinople, people of different backgrounds met and mingled, traded goods and shared stories, learned each other's ways and created something new together. The great movements of peoples, whether the settlers who found new homes in Iceland's valleys, the Rus, who traveled the rivers of Eastern Europe, or the Normans who reshaped medieval France and England, remind us that humanity's story is one of constant motion and adaptation. Like rivers flowing to the sea, people have always sought new horizons, carrying their customs and beliefs with them while absorbing new ways of living from those they encounter. We've witnessed how beliefs and traditions evolved over generations, as the old gods of Asgard gradually gave way to the Christian cross, yet elements of ancient wisdom and practice endured in art, literature, and daily life. These transitions remind us that change need not mean complete abandonment of the past, but rather a gentle weaving of old and new into rich, new patterns of living. The archaeological discoveries we've explored, from buried longships to silver hoards, from runic inscriptions to settlement remains, show us how the past is never truly lost, but waits patiently beneath the soil to share its secrets. Each artifact tells a story, each burial ground holds memories, each ancient foundation reveals how people much like ourselves lived, loved, and faced life's challenges. As we've traveled through time together, we've seen how the Vikings' influence extended far beyond their age. Their words still live in our language, their stories still capture our imagination, their legal traditions still influence modern governance, and their artistic motifs still inspire creators today. Like seeds carried on the wind, their cultural legacy took root in distant soils and continues to flower in unexpected ways. The great sagas and poems that preserve their tales remind us of humanity's endless desire to remember and understand, to find meaning in our experiences and pass wisdom to future generations. Through these stories, we connect with the hopes, fears, and dreams of people who, though separated from us by centuries, shared the same fundamental experiences of life. The warmth of family, the bond of friendship, the pride of achievement, the pain of loss, the wonder of discovery. In the trading towns that grew along coasts and rivers, we saw how commerce brought people together, creating networks of exchange that enriched lives materially and culturally. These connections remind us that human prosperity often flows from cooperation rather than conflict, from the sharing of goods and ideas rather than their forceful taking. The merchants who crossed seas with precious cargoes were as important to history as the warriors who wielded swords. The settlements that grew from temporary camps to thriving communities show us how people can put down roots in new soil while maintaining connections to their origins. From Iceland to Normandy, from Dublin to Kiev, Norse settlers adapted to new environments while contributing their own traditions to the cultural mixture. Their experience reminds us that identity is not fixed but fluid, enriched by each new encounter and exchange. As we've followed the thread of history through these centuries, we've seen how innovations in technology, changes in belief, shifts in political power, and evolution of social structures all interweave to create the fabric of medieval life. The Viking Age was not simply an isolated period of Northern European history, but part of a larger pattern of human development that continues to unfold. The gradual transition from the Viking Age to medieval Christian kingdoms shows us how societies evolve not through sudden breaks, but through gradual transformation. Like the changing of seasons, cultural change flows naturally from one state to another, carrying elements of the past forward while embracing new possibilities. As our journey comes to its end, we might reflect on how the lessons of this distant time still resonate. The courage to venture into the unknown, the ability to adapt to new circumstances, the importance of maintaining connections across vast distances, the power of cultural exchange to enrich lives. These themes are as relevant today as they were 1,000 years ago. Let us rest now in the quiet of history's embrace, knowing that we are part of an unbroken chain of human experience stretching back through centuries. Like those who gathered in great halls to hear skalds recite ancient tales, we have shared in the telling of a story that belongs to all of us. As you drift toward sleep, may you carry with you the whispered wisdom of ages past, the gentle reminder that we are all travelers on time's great ocean, connected to those who came before and those who will follow. In the deepening quiet, Imagine the soft sound of waves against a distant shore, the murmur of ancient voices carried on the wind, the peaceful settling of time's dust over the footprints of history. Let the story of the Viking Age merge with your dreams, a reminder that every age is both an ending and a beginning, part of the endless cycle of human experience flowing like a great river through time toward tomorrow's dawn.